Chapter 1326, Eye of the Storm. Drifting across the perfectly still surface of the water, the battered ketch slowly gained distance from the swirling wall of the dark mist. The raging winds died down, then disappeared altogether. A strange silence settled upon the world, as if they were caught in a gap between two moments. Only the subtle ripples that spread through the radiant mirror of the frozen river's surface by the bow of the ketch showed that this hidden sanctuary was not entirely, and eternally, unchanging. Sonny fell back and leaned tiredly on the side of the wooden boat. Breathing heavily, he looked at Nephis, then at Ananke. The silence was too sweet to break it with the sound of human voices. He was too exhausted to speak as well for a while. All three of them remained motionless, trying to recover from the torturous fury of the howling storm. We'll have to dive back into that hell eventually. The thought alone made Sonny shudder. Refusing to entertain it, he closed his eyes and slumped down, intending to rest for a few minutes. Instead, he fell into the embrace of sleep almost immediately, perhaps because of nightmare, or perhaps because even the defiled titans could not reach into the depths of the time storm. Nothing visited him in his dreams. Sonny woke up with a start when a shadow fell on him. For a split second, he was afraid that they were back in the ruthless grinder of the time cataclysm. But it was only Nephis. She had walked to the bow of the ketch to look ahead, her face pale and her eyes sunken. He stared at her for a few moments, then sighed and pulled himself upright. How long was I asleep? She lingered for a while. There's no way to tell. Sonny frowned, confused by the odd answer. However, then he felt it himself in the place where the deep discomfort of sensing the broken nature of time had been. There was now a strange emptiness. But it was not the familiar comfort of sensing the natural flow of time either. Instead, it was the absolute lack of it. He frowned, realizing that he could not feel the passage of time at all. It was a truly bizarre sensation, one that could not be properly described with words. His heart was beating, and his chest rose and fell as he breathed. However, he did not know how long each heartbeat took, and how much time passed between each breath. It could have been a moment, a minute, or 1,000 years. It could have been an eternity. Sonny grimaced. Damnation. What was happening now? They were alive, strangely enough. At least it seemed that way. His body ached all over, still reeling from the terrible strain of surviving the storm. Such pain was something that only the living felt. Sonny turned to Ananke, wanting to ask the priestess a few questions, but remained silent in the end. His expression darkened. The priestess looked even younger than she had the last time he saw her. Now she resembled a girl of 10 years of age at most. Her ebony hair was short and unruly, and her lovely face had become round and immature, with clear blue eyes and cheeks that had yet to lose all of their baby plumpness. Ananke was sitting on the helmsman's bench, her feet dangling above the deck. Noticing his gaze, she picked up the folds of her comically oversized mantle and jumped down. "Greetings, my lord." Her pleasant voice had grown childish and awkward. Sonny hesitated, staring at the young girl. She looked nothing short of adorable, however. He did not feel uplifted by the cute sight. Instead, his heart felt as heavy as a mountain. If when they broke free of the storm, would Ananke even be able to return to weave on her own? He glanced at Nephis, who stood with her back to them, then sighed. "We'll think of something." Then, Sonny turned to the child priestess and asked, "What is going on exactly?" She smiled sweetly, her azure eyes sparkling, 2 dimples appearing on her plump cheeks. "We are in the eye of the storm, my lord. Time is frozen still here. It is not dangerous, I think. It's just that." He was momentarily distracted from her words by a subtle movement in the water. The strange thing, though, was that he did not sense any shadows shifting. Turning his head, Sonny glanced outside the ketch. The surface of the great river was perfectly clear and flat, turning into a giant mirror. The azure sky reflected in it seamlessly, suffused with bright sunlight. It was as though the entire world was shining with a splendid radiance. The sight of it was like a vision from a beautiful dream. However, there was something beneath the radiance. Sonny heard Ananke end the sentence as he peered through the light. "We shouldn't look at the water." Her warning came a split second too late. The scream died in his throat as he saw. A pale figure moving across the surface of the water with calamitous killing intent, shrouded in countless layers of furious darkness. That rippling darkness was boundless and unfathomable, containing within itself an infinite number of choices. The features of the harrowing figure were vague and obscured, and all he could see was a pair of terrible wings, their feathers black like those of a raven. They spread vast enough to devour the sky and drown the world in howling mist. Staggering back, Sonny fell to his knees and vomited blood. 2 streams of it burst from his nose, too. Blood weave, which would usually prevent something like this, was reeling in stupor, and so was he. It was as though his mind had suffered a tremendous shock from witnessing the dark figure and sensing the harrowing depth of its obliterating killing intent. Hurting and disoriented, Sonny wiped the blood off his face and spat. What the hell is that?" Ananke remained silent for a while, uncharacteristically solemn. Then, she said in a low voice, "Those are reflections of the gods, my lord, and of the demons that slayed them." Chapter 1327, Frozen Reflections. Sonny wiped the blood off his lips and remained motionless for a while, staring at the wooden deck. There was an irate expression on his face, and when he threw a furtive glance to the side, his body trembled slightly. That's great. The reflections of the gods and daemons. It made sense in the senseless kind of way that seemed to be prevalent here in the tomb of Ariel. The time storms were echoes of the final battles between the daemons and the gods. They had been created when the aftershocks of those unimaginable clashes reached the great river through the titanic walls of the Black Pyramid. So it wasn't that unusual that there were reflections of the awesome deities still remaining in the eye of the storm, where time was frozen still. Whose figure had Sonny witnessed just now? Nephis, it seemed, also wanted to know. "What did you see?" Her voice sounded nonchalant, but he could tell that she was curious. Sonny groaned and sat down, then summoned the endless spring to take a sip of water. Washing the taste of blood off his tongue, he lingered for a moment and said in a somber tone, "I think I just saw Nether in full war mode, going all out." The harrowing figure which was shrouded in darkness. Sonny was not certain, but he felt that it was the prince of the underworld, Nether, the demon of destiny himself. After all, he was also the demon of choice, and that was what Sonny had sensed within the boundless expanse of rippling darkness, an infinite amount of choices. True darkness also originated from the mists of the Hollow Mountains, where Nether's domain lay. Curse it, Sonny had seen a daemon before. However, he had not been reduced to such a sorry state after meeting Hope face to face. Why was gazing upon the prince of the underworld so different? I guess it was not seeing him. It was feeling an echo of his killing intent. Nether's murderous will was so terrifying that simply looking at his reflection almost killed Sonny. And that was considering that he was an ascended tyrant, too. If a mundane person had glimpsed the visage of the infuriated daemon, they would have probably dropped dead at the spot. Simple as that. Scary. Sonny turned to Nephis and smiled weakly. "Neph, remind me to never get on the bad side of a deity." She raised an eyebrow slightly, giving him a dubious look. "What is that supposed to mean?" Ignoring his request, Nephis shook her head and asked, "So what did he look like?" The demon of destiny. She had spent her second nightmare in the underworld, so she must have been dying to know. Sonny remained silent for a moment. Eventually he shrugged. "I have no idea. I only saw a pair of raven wings and a figure moving within a shroud of terrifying darkness. That was pretty much it. But it was also enough to almost make me pass out, so." He looked at Ananke and asked, "Are all gods and daemons reflected in these waters?" The child priestess seemed unsure. "I don't know, my lord. Perhaps they are, all except Weaver, who did not participate in the Doom War. War God, Sun God, Beast God, Storm God, Heart God, and Shadow God, their reflections should be here. The same goes for the demons, the demon of desire, the demon of dread, the demon of choice, the demon of imagination, and the demon of repose. Oh, and the 6th one. I seem to be forgetting her title." Ananke's childish voice grew quiet with embarrassment, and then ceased completely. Sonny stared at her for a few moments. "Right. The 6th one should be Oblivion. Oblivion is a she, huh?" Then he knew the titles of all 7 demons now, didn't he? Weaver, the demon of fate, the oldest of the 7. Hope, the demon of desire, although she was also often called Desire, the demon of hope, which was not confusing at all. Then there was Ariel, the demon of dread, and the demon of oblivion, whose name had been forgotten by all. Nether, the demon of destiny, or choice, was the youngest. The last 2 he had never heard of before. The demon of imagination and the demon of repose. Weird. Their titles did not sound particularly demonic at all. He had expected something disastrous and terrifying, like the demon of strife or the demon of frenzy. The demons had been feared above all other lesser deities, after all, and perhaps even more than the gods. The word for imagination could also be translated as illusion, vision, or sight. The word for repose could also be translated as renewal, rejuvenation, and restoration. What was so frightening about these things? Well, imagination can indeed be scary, I guess. I can also imagine how ceaseless renewal might end up becoming a nightmare, sort of. Nevertheless, the 2 daemons were a complete mystery to him. To be honest, all 7 daemons were a mystery, as were all 6 gods. If only there was a place where I could learn a bit about each of them, including how they looked and fought, right? Sunny glanced at the radiant water, suddenly consumed not only by dread, but also by burning curiosity. It was all right here, one look away. Shuddering, Sunny forced himself to turn away. What are you doing, fool? He was in the tomb of Ariel, of all places. A titanic pyramid built to bury the truths that even one of these ineffable beings had not been able to bear, and where the knowledge of those truths gave birth to the defilement. If Sunny failed to understand that not all truths were meant to be learned in such a place, then he really did not deserve to be alive. Ah, what a disappointment. Why wasn't there a demon of curiosity? Curiosity was a much more terrifying thing than imagination and repose, as far as he was concerned. Looking at the embarrassed Ananke, he sighed and shook his head. The 6th demon is oblivion. Don't worry, it's her nature to be easily forgotten. You already did well by remembering that there was one more of them. Really. The child priestess hesitated for a while, then nodded with a smile. Right. Thank you, my lord. Trying not to look too closely at the surface of the water, Sunny turned away and peered into the distance, where the dark wall of the time storm towered like a boundary of the world. His expression dulled. The moment of respite in the eye of the storm was welcome and unexpected, but it was also doomed to be brief. Soon, they would have to challenge the fury of the unnatural cataclysm once again. The thought made him shudder. Chapter 1328. Serene Peril. It was peaceful in the eye of the storm, if a little bit eerie. The strange lack of the sensation of time had been uncomfortable at first, but Sunny quickly found himself forgetting that time had ever existed at all. The view of the azure sky reflecting on the perfectly calm water was beautiful and tranquil. The silence was like a lullaby, making him feel at ease. Sunny had not felt such peace in a long, long while. There was no need to hurry, and no possibility to do so anyway. Without telling how long their actions took, they could not know whether they were being slow or swift either, so it was fine to just let go and remain still for a bit, enjoying the serene stillness of the world. Which was why Sunny soon found himself feeling cold dread. This is not good. It was just too easy to be lulled into inaction in this strange and frozen place. At some point, Sunny realized that he did not know how long he had remained sitting with his back against the side of the ketch, without a thought in his head. His eyes widened slightly. If they weren't careful, would they end up frozen forever in the ice storm too, just like everything else was frozen in this tranquil haven? Shuddering, he turned to Ananke and asked, "How long has it been since we reached this place?" She helplessly shook her small head. "I don't know, my lord." He hesitated. "How long before we dive back into the storm then?" The child priestess peered into the distance. Her large blue eyes darkened somewhat. Nevertheless, she said resolutely, "We'll leave as soon as possible. Time might be frozen here, but it still flows outside. It is better not to linger otherwise. Fallen Grace might already be destroyed when we finally escape the disaster, and I would have failed in my task." Sunny let out a relieved sigh. "Right, it is not too bad." They had not been caught in the trap of frozen time yet. Ananke was proof. She had grown a bit younger after they had entered the eye of the storm, meaning that the circle of tranquil water was moving in relation to the unceasing current of the great river. Since she had not turned even younger yet, they couldn't have been idling in the serene silence for too long. She was like their anchor in this beautiful and insidiously dreadful place. Thank the gods. Sonny suddenly wanted to laugh. He could have never imagined that he would be desperate to dive back into the nightmarish havoc of the deathly storm. But here it was, the desire to escape the tranquil circle of frozen time, fast. The future was truly unknowable, and one could never say never. Nephis stirred at the bow of the ketch and looked at them, her expression stiff. I've been keeping an eye on the wall of the storm. We have drawn closer to the outer boundary. Somewhat, but without the current, the ketch is moving too slowly. In fact, it is not moving at all. We will have to raise the sails and summon the wind. It seemed that she had never lost track of their goal. Sonny sighed. The nature of time might have changed, but Neph never did. At least the deepest reaches of her heart did not. She was still just like she had been all those years ago, beneath the branches of the soul-devouring tree. Back then, she had also spent all her time on the shore of the Ashen Barrow, looking west, even if she couldn't quite remember why. Her single-minded determination was something to rely on, as well. It was ironic. Really, a girl whose fate it was to bring change was the most unchanging thing in Sonny's life. As he was thinking that, Ananke's shoulders fell slightly. Yes, my lady. Just give me a moment and I... Nephis shook her head. No. I will summon the wind, and I will steer the ketch. I will guide us out of the storm when we enter it, as well. The child priestess looked up at her with a startled expression. But my lady... Neph stared at her somberly for a few moments, her gaze heavy. Eventually, she said bluntly, "You have grown too weak, Ananke. I'm sorry. Your body is not strong enough to handle the strain. You can't even reach the deck with your feet while sitting on the helmsman's bench. How are you going to control the oar?" She looked down, then sighed. Walking up to the child priestess, Nephis patted her on the shoulder and forced out a smile. "Don't worry. Isn't that why you taught me? You taught me well. I will steer the ketch while you keep the broken time at bay. Each of the three of us will make sure that we escape the storm alive." With that, she threw a poignant look at Sonny. He felt sorry for Ananke, but knew that Nephis was right. Their guide was not capable of guiding the boat through a raging storm anymore, even if it hurt her pride and went against her determination. It was time for the two of them to protect Ananke instead of being protected by her. They had to make sure that she survived the storm. And after that, they had to make sure that she had the means of returning to Weave, too. How did everything become so complicated? The damned storm had thoroughly destroyed their plans. Now, all they could do was finish their battle against it, and then come up with new ones. The strain on Sonny was going to increase, considering that he would be draining the water from the ketch alone this time. But he would have to manage somehow. If there was one consolation, it was that half of the journey was already behind them. Knowing that each minute brought them closer to safety, he wouldn't need to preserve his essence as much. Sonny smiled, then clapped his hands. "All right, let's get out of the eye of the storm first. Honestly, this beautiful place is way too creepy. I'll feel better once we're drowning in raging water and being battered by devastating winds. Wouldn't you?" Not to mention that he was still struggling against an overwhelming desire to peer into the reflections frozen in the still water. Consequences be damned. Ananke lowered her head, despondent, but there was nothing she could say. Her small frame was indeed not suitable for steering the ketch through the powerful storm anymore. Transcendent or not, she was still a child now. Feeling a sense of urgency, the three of them struggled against the lulling tranquility of the frozen time and hurried themselves, hoping to return to the crushing embrace of the storm as soon as possible. Chapter 1329, Last Hurdle. As Nephis steered the ketch toward the wall of darkness, Sonny had some time to prepare himself mentally for the arduous struggle that lay ahead of them. He also had time to observe Ananke closer. What he saw did not bode well. Despite being an adult, and someone hundreds of years old at that, the priestess had regained the body of a young child. Looking at her youthful appearance, it was hard to remember how ancient, decrepit, and frail she had been once, when they met her in the far future. But the change was not exactly a benevolent one. Despite being full of vitality, Ananke had obviously grown much weaker. Her immature body was not as strong and physically capable as it had been before, but, worse than that, the differences went deeper than that. As Sunny observed the child priestess, he slowly realized that her mind had been affected by her turning into a child as well. It was as though her head could not contain the mature consciousness of an experienced adult anymore, nor could her heart handle the powerful emotions of one with the same composure. Ananke had not really turned dull or less intelligent, but there was a certain infantile straightforwardness to how she spoke and behaved now. Her eyes, which had always been wise, seemed slightly naive as well. Her mind was slowly regressing. Sunny felt cold claws grip his heart. Curse it! He gritted his teeth and looked down, but then forced himself to straighten. Fine. It's fine. She has taken care of us enough. We'll take care of her, now. Of course, they still needed the child priestess to protect the Ketch from the ravages of broken time. Sunny hoped that she would be able to maintain the bubble of stability around the Ketch, both for their sake and her own. Once they were out of the storm, they would find a way to help her return to Weave, even if it meant turning around and sailing back upstream. His heavy thoughts were interrupted by a sudden breeze that threw tiny droplets of water into his face. Sunny looked up, sensing the shadows around them shift. We're here. The wall of darkness was already drawing close. Hurry. Nephis dismissed the winds she had summoned and hurried to the middle of the Ketch. Together, they swiftly lowered the sails and dismantled the masts, repeating the actions they had performed before entering the storm for the first time. By the time they were done, the water around them was not still anymore. Although weak, there was a hint of a current, pulling them toward the seething wall of dark mist. The light of the seven suns slowly dimmed, and the winds grew more violent. Sunny grimaced, sensing the bizarre transition from the absence of time to the unnerving mess of it being broken and volatile. Come on, Ananke. Despite his worries, the child priestess performed her task just as flawlessly as she had before. Submitting to her will, the feeling of time having gone mad diminished, allowing him to breathe freely. The nauseating feeling of fundamental wrongness in the world was still there, but bearable. Sunny quietly cursed. Arg! I have not missed that sensation. The current was growing faster and faster, the still surface of the water becoming restless. Finally, waves appeared, small and weak at first, then chaotic and powerful. Standing at the stern of the Ketch, Nephis steered it with an iron hand. Sparks of white flame danced in her eyes, refusing to be devoured by the encroaching darkness. Here we go. The darkness swallowed the world once again. The tranquil silence was torn apart, replaced by the furious howling of the wind. The deck of the Ketch jerked, mounting a tall wave. A thunderous thunderclap shook the world. This is it. The last hurdle. Looking into the nightmarish abyss of the storm, Sunny found Ananke's shoulder and pulled her closer to him, so that she wouldn't be thrown overboard by the violent waves. Looking down, he hesitated for a few moments and then smiled. Don't worry. It will be fine. I once rode a saint into the depths of the ocean to fight a corrupted terror. You know, that was way scarier than this. Ananke stared at him with her large azure eyes, and then nodded. Yes, my lord. Sunny grinned, then picked up the iron bowl and prepared to scoop up as much water as he could. Granted, I only survived fighting the Sibyl of the Fallen Grace by luck, and now I need to survive this storm somehow, to meet her again. What a ridiculous turn of events, really. It was indeed a bit ridiculous. However, Sunny did not feel like laughing. The storm swallowed them like a giant beast. The Ketch flew on the raging current, dwarfed by towering waves. The swirling mist enveloped the world, making it seem as though nothing except for the terrible disaster remained within the tomb of Ariel. The insidious tranquility of the eye of the storm seemed as though it had never existed. They had left its shelter, as well as the reflections of the gods and the daemons behind. Sunny would have felt regret at the missed opportunity to learn divine secrets, but he had no time to think about such things. Bending down, he scooped up the first portion of water and tossed it back into the mist. His body did not ache for now. His reserves of essence were not empty. For now, his mind was not numbed by the sickening feeling of time breaking apart. For now, all these torments would come soon. And then hopefully he would leave them behind as well, to make space for some new horrors, without a doubt. But one day, at the end of it all, a bright future awaited him, maybe. For now, however, what lay ahead was the past. Sunny had to travel far into the past, meet dusk of the fallen Grace, find the members of the cohort, and conquer this damned nightmare. Shielding his face from the devastating blow of the wind, he gritted his teeth. Ah, really now? They were braving a storm of broken time in the company of a 200-year-old child who was a priestess of the nightmare spell. Sunny chuckled. No one is going to believe this crap. Chapter 1330, Floodgates. The time storm seemed even more violent the second time around. The deafening howling of the wind had grown deeper and louder, sounding more like a monstrous roar now. It was as if an enormous beast was struggling to break free of its chains somewhere below the waves, its voice reverberating across the entire world and shaking the heavens. The sky itself seemed like it had been torn asunder and collapsed. A flood of boiling mist poured through its broken dam, devouring the seething surface of the great river. The tiny speck of the wooden ketch flew through the howling abyss, surrounded by frenzied darkness. Sometimes a thunderous crack would drown out the fury of the storm, as if the pillars of the world were fracturing and crumbling apart. Then, a blinding flash of lightning would momentarily illuminate the turbulent expanse of dark water. Hidden by the mist, colossal waves rose and fell like black mountains, carrying with them an obliterating weight. And those were only the outward manifestations of the harrowing storm. Sunny did not know what kind of destructive forces were clashing in the depths of the river below the ketch, but he could feel the nature of time turning more and more twisted around them. Even protected by Ananke, he could feel his body and mind twist and crack with it. Arg! He failed to contend with the furious power of the wild current and was sent tumbling, colliding with the side of the ketch. Blinded by pain and ignoring it, Sunny reached out and caught the child priestess before she was washed overboard. The ropes connecting them to the ketch became entangled, but it was the least of his problems right now. The wooden boat was creaking and groaning around them, seemingly on the verge of breaking apart. Nephis had firmly planted herself at the stern, holding onto the steering oar with all her might. White flames were dancing in her eyes, and soft radiance rose from her skin, made vague and unclear by the veil of mist. The ketch was falling from a towering wave, and Sunny felt weightless for a moment. His body was actually separated from the deck, drifting upward. He had to activate the feather of truth and make himself heavier in order to not be tossed into the air. Placing himself between the wooden deck and Ananke, Sunny gritted his teeth. A moment later, the crushing impact of the fall came, knocking the wind out of him. Hurt, suffocating. He whispered a quiet curse. The ketch was filling up with water. How was he supposed to drain it if he couldn't even remain standing? They had done well up until now. It was impossible to tell how long their dreadful journey through the storm had lasted. But judging by how tired and battered his body was, it couldn't have been a small amount of time. Despite that, there was no sign of the furious disaster growing any weaker. In fact, it was only becoming more violent and dire, and now his strength was failing him. I can't resist it with just my body anymore. Sunny knew that he had to conserve his essence as much as possible, yet the situation had become too desperate. Even if it was too soon, there was no other choice but to burn the bridges and open the floodgates, hoping that the storm would subside sooner than his reserves ran dry. If not, it's going to be all right, Ananke. We'll just have to hold on for a little bit more. His whisper was too quiet for the child priestess to hear, through the deafening roaring of the storm, but it made him feel stronger. Pushing himself off the deck, Sunny threw a somber glance at Nephis. Changing Star was standing at the stern of a ketch like a beautiful statue, surrounded by a white halo. Her slender figure, silhouetted by the fluttering fabric of the wind-swept tunic, was the only source of light in the ocean of seething darkness. Her face was pale and motionless, turned into a porcelain mask by the torment of her torturous flaw. Neph's eyes were grim and radiant, burning with furious resolve and cold determination. She was struggling just as much as he was. She was also just as stubborn and relentless as he was. Together they were going to overcome this terrible storm, despite it all. Sunny pushed air into his burning lungs. And then for a little bit more and a little bit more, sparks of light ignited in the mist around him, coalescing into several memories. First, a serpentine crown of black metal appeared on his head. Then, a flute carved out of emerald bone appeared in his hand. Sunny took a deep breath and activated the royal promise enchantment of the Crown of Twilight. Immediately, he felt a subtle connection form between him and the seething waters of the great river. That connection was weak and insignificant, but it was strong enough for his goals. Commanding the water like he did shadows, Sunny willed it to move. The foaming water that filled the insides of the ketch, already reaching above his shins, suddenly stirred. Flowing in reverse, it tentatively crawled up the sides of the boat and spilled into the turbulent darkness beyond. 1 second passed, then another, a few heartbeats later. The remaining water was already not as deep as it had been before. This method was certainly much more convenient than draining it one scoop of the iron bowl at a time. On the downside, he could feel his essence disappearing with a frightening speed, as well as a heavy strain pressing down on his already reeling mind. Heavy, it's heavy. Gritting his teeth, Sunny persisted. At the same time, he brought Bone Singer to his lips and blew into it. The next moment, a dome of blessed silence enveloped the ketch, sparing their ears from the staggering cacophony of the storm. The sudden lack of deafening noise left him stunned. Swaying, Sunny fell heavily to the deck and grabbed onto the side of the ketch, holding himself in place. Outside, the havoc of the time cataclysm was the same. The small boat was still being tossed around by the raging current, flying up the towering waves and then plummeting down. But inside, at least for a little while, there was silence and peace. Taking a shaky breath, Sunny lowered his head and wondered how long he would be able to keep this peace in existence. Not long. It won't be long at all. Chapter 1331. The Well of Wishes. Nephis continued to struggle against the storm, guiding them through the towering waves. But Sunny and Ananke received a moment of respite, if it could even be called that. They were still inside the ketch, which was tossed around like a toy boat by the raging current. Sunny was using one hand and all of his tyrannical strength to keep himself in place while holding Ananke with the other. But without the need to feverishly scoop out water, they at least could catch their breaths and remain motionless for a while, for as long as his essence lasted, that was. Sunny leaned against the wet wood tiredly, consumed by bitter exhaustion. His chest was rising heavily. Not good. Being a supreme memory, the Crown of Twilight was a very powerful tool. But correspondingly, it consumed a lot of essence. It was going to take a few minutes for his tentative authority over water to drain the entire boat after that. It would be unwise to keep sustaining the effect of the royal promise. He sighed. What was even a minute? In this god-forsaken storm, it was impossible to tell. The effects of time being broken were still ravaging them. Sunny had already grown accustomed to seeing ghastly hallucinations impose themselves on the bodies of Nephis, Ananke, and himself. There were vague, harrowing shapes sometimes appearing from the mist as well. He could never discern their nature. But the glimpses of unknown figures and events filled him with a deep sense of terror. Were they twisted fragments of the past, of the future? Or something else entirely, that had crawled into the world through the rifts in the broken framework of the absolute law? He did not know and did not wish to know. Perhaps this is how Cassie feels. There were shadows as well. They were just as twisted and perverse as the rest of things within the time storm. He had already limited the range of his shadow sense as much as it was possible, but he could still feel the chilling wrongness of them, and couldn't help but shudder. Sunny felt grim and hopeless. At that moment, a childish voice distracted him from his dark thoughts. My lord." He stirred and looked down at the small figure of the child priestess. Ananke had grown even younger. Now she looked like a girl of maybe 7 years of age, tired and afraid. Her mind must have regressed further too. She was still maintaining the bubble of stability around the ketch, but it felt weaker. She looked more like an actual child than a wise saint trapped in the body of one as well. Sunny forced out a weak smile and asked, trying to keep his tone soft, "What is it?" Ananke lingered for a while, seemingly embarrassed. Eventually, though, she whispered in a small voice, "I'm scared." Those words, they cut Sunny like a knife. The proud priestess he knew would have never allowed herself to say something like that to a person she considered her ward. The fact that she had meant that Ananke was gone further than he thought. His heart grasped by the icy claws of anger and regret. Sunny struggled to keep his bitter emotions away from his face. His smile froze. "There's no need to be afraid, Ananke. We will escape this storm, the three of us. I am sure of it. See?" He pointed to the water, which was flowing out of the ketch on its own. What he had said to the child priestess was not a lie. Sunny desperately believed that they would, indeed, survive the time storm, or rather he had fooled himself into believing that. He might not have been able to lie to others, but lying to himself? That was the easiest thing in the world. Ananke grew quiet, seemingly calmed a little by his words. However, her small face was still sick with fear. After a few moments, she asked again, her voice tentative, "My lord?" Sunny pulled her closer to him, struggling against the sudden movements of the ketch. "Yes." She hesitated a little. "Might you tell me a fairy tale?" He froze, startled by her request. It was natural for a distressed child to want to hear a fairy tale. Probably. Right? The problem was, Sunny couldn't remember any. The only one that he could think of was the strange tale of the wooden boy that Nephis had told him about. But considering its macabre ending, he didn't think it was very suitable to tell that one to Ananke. He shifted slightly, then said softly, "I'm sorry, I don't think I really know any fairy tales." The child priestess lowered her head. "Oh," Sunny hesitated for a moment. "How about you tell me one instead?" Ananke looked at him in surprise, her large azure eyes widening. "Me?" He nodded with an encouraging smile. "Yes. Which one is your favorite?" The child priestess stared at him, sparks slowly igniting in her eyes. She seemed to have forgotten about the terrifying fury of the storm, at least for a moment. A tentative smile brightened her small face. "Oh, it is about the Well of Wishes." Sunny raised an eyebrow, acting as if he was paying rapt attention to her words. "The Well of Wishes, huh?" Ananke nodded seriously. "Yes. They say that the world was born from a wish. And so, a Well of Wishes is hidden at the estuary of the river because it flows back in time, to the moment when the world was born. Anyone who reaches there will have their most dear wish come true." Sunny tilted his head, surprised by the strange logic of the fairy tale, both by how odd it was, and that there strangely was logic to it at all. In the beginning, there was desire. Was it so wrong to say that the world was born from a wish? As the water left the ketch and his essence burned, the child priestess continued with a smile. "There was once a brave girl who was separated from her mother by the currents. The girl couldn't meet her mother, because she was riverborn, but she found a magic ship, which allowed her to sail the river just like an outsider. As the storm raged around them, Ananke told him about the incredible adventures of the riverborn girl in her small, childish voice. By the time the riverborn girl found her outsider mother, the mother had grown weak and frail from old age. Knowing that time would separate them again soon, forever, the girl sailed for the estuary. Ananke's voice had grown excited. And finally she found the Well of Wishes. The girl's wish was to be with her mom, and so the well made her mother riverborn as well. She returned upstream on her magic ship, and they lived together happily forever. She looked at him expectantly, all worry gone from her face. Sunny held her close, feeling the violent forces of the storm trying to throw the battered ketch down. "That is a wonderful fairy tale, Ananke. I liked it a lot." The child priestess smiled. "You are an outsider too, my lord. You don't even need a magic ship to reach the estuary. Maybe you can find the Well of Wishes too." He didn't have the heart to tell her that what waited in the estuary was the source of the defilement, and not a magical well that granted everyone their dearest wishes. Instead, Sunny lingered for a while. Eventually, he nodded. "Yes, wouldn't that be nice? Maybe I'll really find the Well of Wishes and have my greatest wish come true one day. Who's to say I won't?" He smiled, The Well of Wishes. Sunny tensed, feeling the approach of an impact. It was a beautiful fairy tale indeed. Chapter 1332 Splinters. The ketch was thrown into the air by the powerful current, like it had been 1,000 times already, and then plummeted down. Bruised and battered, Sunny gritted his teeth and prepared to endure the violent shock of the impact, just like he had endured 1,000 of them already. The seething water seemed as hard as stone when the bottom of the wooden boat hit it. He held on to the side of the ketch, feeling a grim sense of fatigue and hopelessness overwhelm his mind. The darkness was as oppressive as it had been before, the mist was as blinding as it had been before, and the fury of the storm was as chillingly dreadful as it had been before. However, this impact was different from all the previous ones. Sunny failed to see the moment the wood split, but he heard it. Even through the howling of the hurricane wind and the roaring of the falling waves, the cracking sound seemed clear and deafening. By the time he turned, Nephis was already falling. She hit the deck with a dull thump, leaving a streak of blood on it, and tumbled forward. A split second later, her back hit the protruding fittings of the dismantled mast, violently arresting her fall. A stifled groan escaped from her lips. What happened? It took Sunny a moment to notice a jagged piece of broken wood that she was gripping with both hands, still, her knuckles white. Then he hurriedly glanced at the stern of the ketch. His pupils narrowed. The steering oar was gone. There was only the piece Nephis was holding and a scattering of wet splinters on the deck. The rest of it had shattered and was washed away by the raging current. Sunny froze for a moment, both terrified and relieved. Relieved because it was not the deck itself that had cracked, terrified because the ketch had become completely uncontrollable now. The next wave was already approaching, and with no one to steer the boat to face it directly, it was going to hit them from the side, which meant that the ketch would most likely roll. Even if it didn't immediately, there would be the next wave, and the next, and the next, and 1,000 more after that. Without a helmsman leading the ketch through the storm, they were doomed. Curse it! There was no time to think, so he just acted on instinct. Releasing the enchantments of the Crown of Twilight and the Bone Singer, Sunny called upon the shadows instead. A tide of them poured out of the small stone lantern that hung on his belt, filling the ketch. There had already been shadows there, but all of them were twisted and broken, turned wrong and eerie by the ravages of broken time. Sunny wasn't sure that he could communicate with these shadows, and so he summoned more reliable helpers from within the shadow lantern. The cacophony of the storm returned with a deafening vengeance, hitting Sunny like a physical force. The rolling wave reached their small boat and dove underneath it, sending the ketch rising into the dark vastness of the raging mist. The deck tilted dangerously underneath him, threatening to send Sunny and Ananke overboard. Nephis slid in their direction before grabbing onto the fitting of the mast. As they were being simultaneously thrown into the air and pulled into the water, the shadows surged forward. They flowed over the sides of the wooden boat, enveloping it like a black shroud. Then the shadows solidified, turning the ketch into an improvised arc. The opening above the deck was closed completely, cutting off the streaming water and the crushing blows of the wind. All that remained inside were wisps of swirling mist, and the darkness pierced by the soft radiance emanating from Neph's skin. However, the ketch was still tilting as it climbed higher and higher. Soon it was going to crest the wave and either overturn or plummet back down into the raging waters. Sunny let out a low growl, then pushed himself and Ananke off the side of the boat and scaled the tilting deck, grabbing the fittings of the mast next to Nephis. A moment later, shadows wrapped themselves around the three of them like bonds, pressing them into the wet wood. The shadows were like a firm but elastic harness that would prevent them from flying around the dark interior of the ketch when it inevitably rolled, which happened a few seconds later. Sunny experienced a few moments of weightlessness, his body pressing against the harness, then the familiar trauma of the crash. The cold water, what little of it remained after he had drained it with the help of the Crown of Twilight, flowed across the closed interior of the shadow-veiled boat, pouring into his mouth and nose. But at least the cocoon of shadows he had created held. It protected the ketch from being turned into splinters, and them from being thrown overboard or drowned. For now. But how long could Sunny keep shielding their vessel from the rage of the storm? His reserves of essence were already breached, a lot of it spent by the crown of twilight. Well, one way or another, they were going to find out. As the arc of shadows was being carried by the raging current, Sunny, Nephis, and Ananke tried desperately to endure the arduous strain of being tossed around by the harrowing cataclysm. Sunny and Nephis were laying on the wet deck, secured to it by the bonds of shadows keeping Ananke's small body between them. Pressed tightly against each other, the three of them had no other choice but to suffer the painful impacts of the waves and cling to the last desperate vestiges of hope. The violence of the storm, the bone-chilling cold of the mist, and the muffled roars of the wind filled their hearts with dread. "We will survive this. We will—" Sunny kept repeating these words inside his head, as if trying to will them into existence. His reserve of essence was diminishing slightly with each minute, and so were their chances of making it out of the storm alive. Chapter 1333, Farewells. The Storm. As Sunny was struggling to keep both himself and Ananke whole in the furious grinder of the storm, he could feel her small body trembling. His own body was soaked in cold water and chilled to the bone. At the same time, he could feel the Neph's radiance breathing warmth into it. It was more than just warmth, too. Knowing that it was his shadows that were keeping them safe, Nephis sent her flames to engulf Sunny, strengthening both his body and soul. Most of her light was transferred to him, while the last wisp gently caressed the child priestess. As the white flame surrounded Ananke, the numerous scrapes and bruises covering her small figure instantly healed. She seemed to relax a little. Nephis herself, though, was left devoid of any protection. The two of them were very close, their arms wrapped around each other, with only the trembling child between them. Resting his head on the wet wood of the deck, Sunny silently looked into Neph's eyes. They were lightless and tired, numbed by torment and pain. There was nothing to say. There was nothing to do either. The three of them just had to suffer, endure, and pray that Sunny's essence lasted longer than the storm did. It was more easily said than done. The shadow arc was being shaken and tossed around by the raging elements like a ball. Even though the harness he had created held them in place, it was still a torturous experience. Sunny had to strain all his muscles to lessen the shock of the terrible impacts, holding on to the mast fittings with all his might. That task was not in any way easier than the draining and laborious process of scooping up water with an iron bowl. In fact, it was much harder because he couldn't even stand. He had to protect Ananke as well. Being lost in the depths of a cataclysmic storm was not much different from the few moments of destructive havoc he had experienced when the explosives beneath Falcon Scott were detonated. Only this time, the havoc was going to last much, much longer hours, most likely, or even days. Not that these words held any meaning anymore. The volatile currents of broken time that surrounded them were only growing more wild and unstable. Sunny could feel their sickening influence through the protective bubble that Ananke was still maintaining around the catch. His thoughts had become tangled, and it was hard to maintain focus. But he had to keep the manifested shadows intact, continuously willing their shapes into existence and repairing any damage done to the improvised arc. If Sunny lost concentration, all three of them were going to die. Come on. We have already reached so far. Just a little bit more. Just a little. It was just that he struggled to remain concentrated more and more. The ravages of broken time were growing fiercer, but the protections conjured by Ananke were growing weaker. Soon, Sunny found himself unable to tell when was before and when was after. All that remained was the current moment, the pain in his battered body, the cold mist that stuck to his skin, the warmth of Neph's flame burning softly in the depths of his being, and the tactile sensations of her and Ananke's bodies pressed against his own. All he could do was cling to these sensations, to his connection to the shadows, and find strength in their silent presence. I have to hold on. I have to. But then, slowly, even these feelings grew vague and chaotic. The storm of broken time invaded his mind completely, extinguishing Sunny's ability to be aware of the world. He was left in a torturous state that was not consciousness, but also not the merciful oblivion of losing it. Have to hold. And then, the torture dissipated as well. There was no time. There was no world. There was only the storm. A moment passed. Or maybe an eternity. He did not know, nor was he able to know. The world was swaying gently. Its swaying was like a lullaby. The world smelled of wet wood and emptiness. The world was dark. Sunny was lost comfortably in a sea of darkness. But then, bright sunlight shone through his eyelids, painting the darkness red. Sunlight? Torn from the embrace of comfort by sudden panic. Sunny opened his eyes and sat up with a start. No, no, no. His aching body screamed from the sudden motion. His first thought was that his shadow barrier had dissipated. Otherwise, it wouldn't have let sunlight into the catch, meaning that they were going to be drowned by the storm in a few moments. But then Sunny froze. Why was there sunlight? How could there be in the roaring darkness of the storm? It was then that he finally saw the world. The beautiful azure sky was clear, with not a cloud in sight. The 7 suns hung in its vast expanse, shining softly. The surface of the great river was calm and tranquil, its current as steady as it was supposed to be. The flowing water sparkled as it reflected the sunlight. The shadow barrier had indeed disappeared, but the catch was intact. Sunny took a shaky breath. They had cleared the storm. They escaped. We did it. His whisper was hoarse and quiet. For a moment his heart was drowned by a wave of joy and exhilaration. We did it. But then, a nameless emotion enveloped him in a cold embrace. Sunny shivered. What? Why? Nephis? Ananke? He rose to his knees and looked around, searching for their familiar figures. Neph was there, sitting tiredly with her back against the side of the ketch, but a dull, tearing pain suddenly pierced his heart. No. Sunny's shoulders fell. No. Ananke was nowhere to be seen. The child priestess had disappeared, leaving behind no trace. All that remained was an empty black mantle that lay on the deck, orphaned and forlorn. Crawling a step forward, Sunny clutched the mantle and raised it, staring at the dark fabric with hollow eyes. He remained kneeling for a few moments, unable to move or think or feel. Sunny's soul felt cold, colder even than he had felt in the snowy field outside Falconscott. As he looked at the black mantle, frozen, 2 hands wrapped themselves around his shoulders and Nephis hugged him from behind. She's gone. The warmth of her body and the softness of her voice were like an execution's axe. Sunny trembled. Neph held him tighter, as if unwilling to let go. The storm must have carried us too deep into the past, far beyond where she was born, and so she's gone. I'm sorry, Sunny. The black mantle slipped from his fingers. Looking down, Sunny gasped for breath. But we survived. We survived the storm. Why? His vision blurred. After a while, consumed by pain, he whispered, I am sorry too. Chapter 1334, Dire Promise. Sunny and Nephis remained motionless for a while, carried by the indifferent, inevitable current of the great river. His heart was heavy, too heavy to bear. It was in so much pain that the suffering felt almost physical. Or maybe it was. Eventually the pain turned dull, but the unbearable weight remained. Slowly raising his hand, Sunny tightly gripped one of Neph's arms. She was still hugging him from behind, so he couldn't see her face. She couldn't see his, either, which was perhaps for the best. When Sunny spoke, his even voice was low and full of torment. Neph. He raised his eyes to the distant blue sky. Why can't we protect anyone? There was no answer for a while. Eventually Nephis let out a quiet sigh. Because that is not the world we were born into. She lingered for a moment, her body still pressed against his. Then she added, You and I, and everyone we know, we were born to destroy things, not save them. Sunny lowered his head, thinking that maybe she was right. The world they lived in, both of the worlds, really needed killers more than it needed builders. That was the sign of the dire times they belonged to. But what was the point of slaying nightmare creatures and conquering the trials of the spell if there was nothing to return to except regret and ruin? A few moments later, he heard Neph's voice again. Holding him, she said in a hesitant tone, I don't know if it helps, but Ananke never intended to return to weave. She knew that she wouldn't be coming back all along. Sunny's eyes trembled. Shifting slightly, he turned his head and finally looked at Neph. What? She sighed. What kind of future would it have been to return and spend the rest of her limitless life alone in the graveyard of everything she loved? She had only held out for that long because of a dream about the children of Weaver, us needing her help. Once we were gone, her last reason to remain would have been gone too. Nephis looked away. That was why the supplies we gathered in Weave were only meant for 2 people, not 3, and why she wanted to tell us about its past so much. Her voice grew forced and heavy. That was why she took us to the House of Parting as well, where the Riverborn come to leave on their last journey, to have a feast with their loved ones before saying farewell. Neff's usually motionless face contorted slightly. She remained silent for a moment, then said evenly, "We made her food, listened to her tales, and kept her company along the way. The order of things might have been wrong, but at least she wasn't alone at the end. We were there to send her off." Sonny lowered his head, stunned. The supplies. Why didn't he realize that all the things they had gathered in Weave were meant for the 2 of them, and not Ananke herself? How could he not have noticed something so obvious? Perhaps it was because, deep down, Sonny had always known the hideous truth. He had just closed his eyes to it, not wanting to bear its weight, and found solace in convincing himself that they would think of something later, even though there was nothing they could do to change the bitter outcome. Ananke was gone. He stared at the wooden boards of the deck, trying uselessly to console himself. He told himself that the woman they knew was not the real Ananke. Of course, it didn't help. He told himself that everything had happened according to her wishes, that disappearing in the embrace of the children of Weaver was the best death a priestess of the nightmare spell could have hoped for. Of course, it didn't help either. In the end, there was only one way to lessen the burden crushing his weary heart. It was to turn the pain into anger. Sonny could not bring Ananke back, but he could exact bloody vengeance on those who had doomed her. The Mad Prince, the image of the odious abomination, appeared in front of his eyes. Sonny's face hardened, and his hands slowly turned into fists. That bastard might still be out there somewhere. His eyes gleamed with murderous hate. But then, Sonny reminded himself who the 6 plagues were, or rather, who he thought they were. He remained silent for a while, and then said in a distant voice, "Neff, you know I saw the Mad Prince in a dream." She let go of him and shifted back, allowing Sonny to turn around and look at her. His expression was grim. He hesitated for a few moments, then forced himself to say, "I think I know who he is. Who each of the 6 plagues is. They're us. They're us from the future. Cassie, Effie, Kai, Jet, Mordred, and I, all the members of the cohort, except for you." Sonny remembered the dream where the vestige of the defiled madman had attacked him, the deranged voice calling him a murderer, over and over again. "Murderer." Closing his eyes for a moment, he said quietly, "Because we killed you. You can't be corrupted, and so we must have killed you. That's why there are only 6 plagues." There it was. The thought he was scared to admit to himself, said aloud. Sonny struggled to keep his emotions suppressed and looked at Nephis, not knowing what her reaction would be. Her face was motionless, and her beautiful gray eyes were calm like always. Sonny could usually read the true emotions hiding behind her expressionless mask, but he failed to decipher them this time. Was she confused, unbelieving, angry, frightened? Nephis remained silent for a long time. Then she looked him in the eyes and said calmly, "That's great then." Sonny blinked. That was not the reaction he had expected. Confused, he frowned and asked, making sure that he had heard right. "Great?" Nephis nodded, as if confirming something obvious. "Of course. If the 6 plagues are really us from the future, then we know all about them. We know all their strengths and all their weaknesses. We even know their flaws." She smiled slightly out of the corner of her mouth. "I was worried about having to face them before. But if what you said is true, well, then it changes things. If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. If the enemy is yourself, though, everything becomes much simpler, doesn't it?" Sonny stared at her, stunned. Indeed, she was right. His eyes widened a little. If the Mad Prince was truly a future version of himself, a vile apparition from a future where Nephis was dead, then all it took to kill the bastard was to speak their true name aloud. If the devouring beast was truly a future version of Effie, then killing her would be as easy as isolating the fearsome plague and denying her access to sustenance. Before too long, the defiled abomination would weaken and her body would consume itself. If undying slaughter was truly the future version of Jet, then they simply had to engage her in a battle for an extended period of time, not allowing the wretched thing to slay anyone and absorb their essence. Eventually, her soul would collapse by itself. If torment was truly the future version of Cassie, then her strength lay in her prophetic powers and an incredibly high affinity to revelations and fate. She could not be too formidable physically, so Weaver's mask would render her defenseless. There were the other two, of course. Mordred's flaw was unknown, and Sunny doubted that he would share it freely. However, the Prince of Nothing would be able to deal with the Soul Stealer personally without revealing his secrets. Kai's flaw, meanwhile, was not something that could be exploited to bring him down in battle. Still, knowing how to kill 5 out of the 6 plagues was already a brilliant result. It was much better, by far, than facing 6 harrowing abominations blind. Sunny had been so shaken and revolted by the dreadful possibility of turning into the hateful Mad Prince that he failed to consider its hidden benefits. His eyes gleamed darkly. Looking up, Sunny stared at Nephis silently for a few long, poignant moments. Then, he said quietly, "Neph, let's kill the Mad Prince." His voice slowly grew stronger. "Let's kill that wretch, and the rest of the 6 plagues with him. Let's slaughter the defiled. Let's burn Verge to the ground." He gritted his teeth and leaned forward, his eyes burning with dark, murderous intent. "Let's conquer this horrid nightmare." Sunny's words hung in the air for a moment, and were then carried away by the wind. Nephis remained silent for a while. Then she smiled, white flames igniting in her eyes. "It's a promise." Chapter 1335, After the Storm. The great river was like it had always been, vast, dreamlike, and ceaseless. Its current gently carried the ketch forward, as if the harrowing storm had never happened. The 7 suns slowly traveled across the azure sky, which was painted lilac in the east and vibrant crimson in the west. For a while, Nephis and Sunny remained idle. Their bodies were still reeling from the terrible battle against the raging elements, and so were their minds. The invasive violence of broken time had left them drained and fragile. Their hearts felt hollow, too. Sunny silently lay on the wooden deck, staring at the sky. His head was empty, full of nothing but the sensation of a dull ache that radiated from all across his battered body. It was good to hurt. Pain reminded him that he was alive. There was the smell of wet wood, the peaceful sound of waves splashing against the sides of the ketch, and the warm sunlight. Most noteworthy of all, there was time. He had never been aware of just how important the sense of time was before experiencing its absence. And why would he? People did not usually pay attention to immutable things, simply taking them for granted. But as it turned out, those things were not as absolute when higher beings were involved. Now that they had escaped the storm, the natural flow of time returned in all its glory. Its reliable presence felt reassuring. Time was at peace once again. Time flowed. Eventually, the dull ache permeating his body subsided. The pain in his heart grew duller as well. New sensations took their place. Thirst, hunger, caution, determination. Sunny still felt numb, but his mind was slowly recovering. He lingered for a while longer, then sat up with a quiet sigh. The vista of the great river around them was exactly as before the storm, which posed a bit of a problem. Sometime later, Sunny and Nephis were sitting at the bow of the ketch, looking soberly at several strange tools laying on the deck in front of them. One looked like a bronze astrolabe, another was akin to a sextant, and the third resembled a strange compass. All these had been gifted to them by Ananke and were meant for navigating the great river. Of course, the first one was not really an astrolabe, since there were no stars in the tomb of Ariel. The second one could be considered a sextant, but the set of principles it was supposed to work on was entirely different from the waking world. The third one could indeed show direction, but it was between past, future, dawn, and dusk instead of north, south, east, and west. Sunny and Nephis had learned a fair deal about how to use these tools, but not about why they worked. The great river was not a sphere like Earth was, and it didn't revolve around a star. Instead, 7 artificial suns revolved around the river. Nevertheless, there seemed to be some sort of curvature to it, which neither of them could explain. It was all a mystery. Before, Ananke had been their navigator, but now that she was gone, Sunny and Nephis had to chart the course themselves. Hence, the somber expressions. Nephis sighed. It doesn't make sense. According to this, we are much further downstream than we were supposed to be weeks' worth of sailing away from the lower house. Sunny scratched the back of his head. There was still a current when we were inside the storm. Sure, it was wild and chaotic, but the water still flowed in a single direction, much faster than usual at that. So maybe the storm carried us all the way here. She frowned. But we didn't spend weeks inside it, did we? He hesitated, not knowing what to say. Time had been broken within the storm, so it was impossible to tell how long they had been fighting against it. It could have been days, or hours, or months, especially considering the insidious nature of the frozen time in the eye of the storm. Distance was equally hard to measure. They had to have been not too far from Weave up until the point when Ananke's protections failed. After that, both Sunny and Nephis had been completely out of their minds for spell knew how long, losing all awareness of the world. He grimaced. I have no idea, but the fact remains. We are much further downstream than anticipated. So what? It's good news, really. It means that we are already halfway to Fallen Grace. And it's Sibyl Dusk. Fallen Grace was situated in the distant past, not that far from the span of the great river that corresponded to when the Sibyls had entered the tomb of Ariel at the height of the Doom War. A long journey still awaited Sunny and Nephis if they wanted to reach the last human city, but half of it seemed to already be behind them, which was indeed a piece of great news, since the battered ketch did not look like it would be able to survive the perils of the great river for much longer. Nephis lingered for a while, then nodded. You're right. If everything goes well, we might reach our destination in a couple of weeks. Her face darkened. However, what are the chances that it will? Even though this region of the great river should be safer than the one we come from, it is by no means safe. Without Ananke, they were not going to be able to mask the presence of the ketch from the dwellers of the depths as efficiently. There were battles ahead of them, without a doubt, and while the abominations were supposed to be less powerful downstream, the chances of stumbling onto the defiled increased. Sunny looked at the wooden deck beneath him with a complicated expression. The ketch had endured a lot in the storm. Too much, really. The fact that it was still in one piece spoke volumes about the craftsmanship of the person who had built it. But would it survive a clash with a frenzied nightmare creature? What about one after that, and one after that? His face turned grim. I don't think it will. Nephis seemed to be thinking the same. They were both worried. However, there was nothing they could do. Their only choice was to set sail and pray to the dead gods. Full of somber apprehension, Sunny and Nephis got to work without delay. They raised the 2 masts back into position and fastened the sails to them. The steering oar was gone, so they fashioned a new one from the repair materials stored inside the covetous coffer, affixing it at the stern of the ketch with the help of one of Neph's memories, the Dark Shaper. Then she spoke the names taught to her by Ananke and summoned the winds. The ketch flew downstream once again, cutting the clear waters with its bow. Only now, there were 2 people inside of it instead of 3. Sunny's heart ached. The great river glistened as the 7 suns shone brightly on its vast expanse. Time slowly passed, the interior of the boat full of tense silence. While Nephis struggled to sustain the forward momentum of the ketch, Sunny stood at the bow and peered into the water, hoping to sense a potential attack before it was too late. However, they had not seen any nightmare creatures that day. Instead, they saw something that made both Sunny and Nephis freeze, paralyzed by shock. Looking at the dark silhouette that appeared in the distance, floating aimlessly on the waves, they felt an eerie sense of rejection, as if the world surrounding them was nothing but a dream. Eventually, Sunny flinched and asked, his voice full of disbelief, What the hell is it doing here?" Chapter 1336, Stench of Fate. The small dot that had appeared in the distance slowly drew closer as the ketch approached it, guided by Neph's firm hand. At some point, however, she silently released the names, allowing the boat to drift forward on its own. Her gaze was directed forward, a rare rattled expression apparent on her face. Sunny was no different. Paralyzed by shock, both of them froze. After a few moments of stunned silence, he flinched and asked in a trembling voice, What the hell is it doing here?" His mind was in turmoil, unable to process the truth of what they saw. In front of them, a battered ship was floating listlessly on the waves. Its silhouette was beautiful and fluid, but there were ugly burn marks and terrible scars littering the graceful wooden hull of the damaged vessel. It looked like it had escaped from the depths of hell after a long and dreadful battle. It also looked completely empty, like a ghost ship abandoned by its crew. But what was truly inconceivable about the drifting ship was the sound of rustling leaves carried from its deck by the wind. Looking up, Sunny saw the mighty branches of a sublime tree that grew around the eerie vessel's mast. He knew this ship. He knew it too well. It was the Chainbreaker. The battered vessel in front of them was the ancient flagship of the Fire Hunters, which Noctis had won from them in a gamble. It was also the ship that Cassie and the Firekeepers had restored to its former glory, and which Sunny named. Chainbreaker looked almost exactly the same as the last time Sunny had seen it, but also unfamiliar. Apart from the harrowing scars covering its hull, there were also other differences. The hull itself seemed different, with bands of dull metal reinforcing its graceful lines. He did not recognize the fearsome shape of the ship's ram either. The vessel looked much fiercer than the one from his memories, resembling an embattled warship more than it did a beautiful yacht. There were many discrepancies, but the most glaring one was the sacred tree itself. It was much, much taller and more robust than the one Cassie had nurtured, drowning the entire middle section of the ship in the shadow of its crown. Still, it was the Chainbreaker. Was it? No, it couldn't be. It was inconceivable that the flying ship had somehow found its way into the tomb of Ariel. Sunny failed to understand how it could have appeared here. Seeing it felt simply too bizarre. Shaken, he tore his gaze away from the battered vessel and looked at Nephis. His mouth felt dry. How could it be here? She hesitated, just as rattled as he was. After a while, she shook her head. I don't know. Maybe it's a different ship. The people who built the Chainbreaker could have created more than one vessel. Maybe. Both of them knew that the probability of that being the case was extremely low. Noctis had owned the flying ship for the better part of 1,000 years and modified it extensively over the centuries. He had been the one who planted a tree from the sacred grove of Heart God on the ship's deck and created the enchantments that connected the two into a single whole as well. How could there be another ship like that? Nephis took a deep breath. Or maybe Noctis had visited the tomb of Ariel at some point in time. If he did, then his ship would have been carried into the nightmare by the spell, just like Daron of the Twilight Sea was, because the great river flows through time. She frowned. Does it look like how it had been when Noctis commanded it? It's different from how it is now. In the waking world, I mean. Her voice was full of doubt. Sunny frowned, then looked at the battered ship once more. After a while, he said with uncertainty, No, it doesn't look like either the past or the present version of Chainbreaker. It's different from both. After a short pause, he added, Of course, I was with Noctis only at the very end of the 1,000 years he had spent in the Kingdom of Hope. The ship we traveled on might have looked different before. That guy, he surely rebuilt and modified it many times. The version we saw was only the last out of many. Was that the reason, then? The copy of the Chainbreaker was here because Noctis had visited the tomb of Ariel once upon a time, leaving an imprint for the spell to conjure back to life. If so, then where was the flamboyant sorcerer himself? Why was his ship drifting in the current of time, damaged and abandoned? That theory was the only one that made any kind of sense, but it was still tenuous at best. Sunny and Nephis looked at each other, both feeling a somber sense of unease. Eventually, he sighed. There's actually a different, more pressing question. She nodded slowly. What are the odds that in the endless vastness of the great river, we would blindly arrive at the exact spot where this ship is located? The corner of Sunny's mouth twitched. Looking away, he remained silent for a while. His thoughts were grim. This situation smells, and it's a familiar smell. The stench of fate. He looked at the battered ship darkly. It can't be a coincidence. just like Ananke finding us was not a coincidence. The person who had sent her a message through dreams must have intended for us to find the chainbreaker. Sunny hesitated for a bit and then added, "In fact, I am willing to bet that this is where the dream told her to point us." Both of them remained silent for a while, disturbed. Was it dusk, the Sibyl of fallen grace? Who else could have predicted the future so precisely? Someone who can see the strings of fate far better than I can, that's for sure. Nephis threw one more glance at the battered ship, unnerved, then shook her head. I guess we'll find out soon. For now, we were both worried about the ketch enduring the journey to fallen grace, weren't we? Now, there's a nearly indestructible ship in front of us, one that was built to endure a sea of divine flames, no less. It looks damaged, but since it hasn't sunk yet, the damage must not be too crippling. Sunny stared at her silently for a moment. You want to climb aboard? Are you cray? Are you sure? She met his gaze and shrugged. Why not? He remained silent for a bit. Then, Sunny chuckled wryly and looked away. Damnation. I must be crazy myself because I really want to climb into that ship too. Chapter 1337, Ghost Ship. Bringing the ketch to the towering side of the battered ship, the chainbreaker. Sunny and Nephis lingered for a while, looking up. Both felt more than a little bit of apprehension, but at the same time, they were relieved. Traveling across the perilous expanse of the great river on a mighty ship would be much more reassuring than on a small, damaged sailboat. Eventually, Nephis summoned the familiar golden rope and glanced at Sunny. He nodded, then hesitated for a moment. Bending down, Sunny picked up Ananke's black mantle and looked at it with a forlorn expression. It was the only thing she had left behind, the last reminder of her existence, if one didn't count the ketch itself. It was also the vestment of the priests of the nightmare spell. He remained motionless for a while, then silently wrapped the mantle around his shoulders. As soon as his body became shrouded by the dark folds of the nebulous fabric, Sunny felt a strange shiver run down his spine. He had donned the black mantle in honor of Ananke, to have something to remember her by, but the act suddenly seemed deeply symbolic. It was as though he was devoting himself to Weaver, which Sunny had no intention of doing. And there was another, far more chilling detail. This mantle, was he just imagining things, or was it eerily similar to the tattered rags the Mad Prince wore in the nightmare? It was hard to tell due to how faded and sunburnt the rags were, but if he just pictured what they might have looked like decades or even hundreds of years ago. Sunny frowned, his gaze turning dark. But in the end, he chose to leave the black mantle on. That bastard will not define me. With that, he took a step forward and joined Nephis, who had already thrown the rope up, tightening the loop at its end around the broken railing of the ghost ship. She gave it a couple of tugs, then nimbly climbed up. Sunny followed. A few moments later, they jumped down on the deck of the chainbreaker. An eerie feeling gripped his heart. The deck of the ancient vessel was both familiar and unfamiliar. It was very similar to the one he had spent so much time on, both in the dream realm and the second nightmare. However, there were also glaring differences. The very geometry of the main deck seemed slightly different. However, it was hard to tell what the differences were exactly, because it was severely damaged. Here and there, the wood was splintered and covered in soot, with deep grooves cutting into its surface, as if some enormous beast, or a legion of them, had torn through the ancient wood with monstrous claws. The railings were shattered and broken in many places. The mighty siege engines lay broken and destroyed. Several massive holes had been punched through the deck as well, revealing the devastated interior of the ship. Their jagged edges hinted that something dreadfully powerful had either broken into the cargo hold or had broken free from it. There was not a soul in sight. Sunny and Nephis glanced at each other, wary. Then, without saying anything, he sent his shadows to scout the interior of the ancient vessel. After a swift and cursory search, they had not discovered anything except for more signs of a furious battle. He let out a quiet sigh. It's empty. There's no one here. Nephis nodded, lowering the sword that had appeared in her hand as soon as they climbed aboard. She looked around, seemingly more relaxed, and then said calmly, "Let's explore properly." They spent some time tentatively exploring the abandoned ship. Everywhere they went, they were met with signs of dreadful devastation. Sonny knew for a fact how enduring the enchanted wooden walls of the chainbreaker were. He shuddered when imagining what kind of forces could have brought it to such a sorry state. The last time the flying vessel had been damaged so severely, it was because Cassie had thrown it down from the skies and rammed an immortal saint at full speed. This time, however, it seemed the ship had withstood a harrowing and prolonged assault before being breached, at which point the fighting continued inside. Then, it drifted in the currents of the great river for gods knew how long. As a result, there was nothing left to tell them where and when the ghost ship had really come from, and who had fought in the battle that rendered it broken and empty. Sonny did not know what kind of beings could have devastated the ancient vessel to such a degree, nor did he know what kind of defenders could have resisted their assault. Whoever they were, the aftermath of their cataclysmic clash gave him chills. However, there was good news as well. About an hour later, Sonny and Nephis returned to the main deck and rested in the shade of the sacred tree. Their expressions were thoughtful. Touching the ivory bark, Nephis inhaled deeply. The damage is severe but shallow. There are no leaks, and the ship is not taking on water. While the interior is a mess, the support structures are all holding it is not going to sink anytime soon. She lingered for a moment, studying the sacred tree, and added, "The tree is also alive and healthy. However, the enchantment circuits are broken. The runic circle at the stern is dormant. We won't be able to fly the chainbreaker." Sonny nodded. "Does any of us even know how to control it? Cassie is usually the one doing the steering. She learned directly from Noctis." Nephis sighed. "I don't. Regardless, flying is not an option that said, we don't need the sacred tree and the enchantments to make the ship move. It still has sails, doesn't it? Even though most sails are either burned or torn, we can repair them. We brought enough supplies from Weave." He looked around, thinking, the sails were indeed torn, but there were repair kits just for that purpose among the supplies Ananke had left them with. All in all, it seemed that they had everything necessary to turn the chainbreaker back into a seaworthy vessel, even if the repair job would not look pretty. There would be a lot for them to do. Sonny sighed, then gave Nephis a short nod. "Let's get to work then." Chapter 1338, on the importance of needlework and carpentry. There was a lot of work to be done, and not enough time. The night was already approaching. Sonny and Nephis hastily cleared one of the compartments, the one that corresponded to the captain's cabin on the actual chainbreaker, intending to use it as shelter. Too tired to cook, they ate a cold supper and went to sleep. Sonny did not forget to summon Saint and Fiend to guard them, while Nightmare protected their dreams. In the morning, both felt more refreshed. Their bodies had mostly recovered from the terrible strain put on them by the storm. Most Ascended would have been rendered weak and helpless by the savage cataclysm for weeks, but Sonny and Nephis each possessed astonishing vitality, he because of blood weave, she due to the restorative power of her aspect. They got to work as the 7 suns slowly rose from the gleaming waters. On the first day, they planned to clear the main deck of debris, with Sonny, Nephis, Saint, Fiend, and Nightmare all working together. The arduous task of moving terribly heavy pieces of wreckage was not too hard. It took longer to sift through them, separating the things that had to be disposed of from those that could be of use later. Even though neither Sonny nor Nephis knew how to repair the siege engines, there was a weak hope that someone in Fallen Grace would. The pieces of splintered wood seemed useless at first glance, but it was still the mystical wood that the chainbreaker had been built of. Simply tossing something like that into the water did not sit right with either of them, not even mentioning how precious of a resource wood was in the tomb of Ariel. There were bent and torn pieces of a strange, supremely durable metal as well. Those were also worth keeping. In the end, they abandoned the upper deck and started clearing the main cargo hold instead. By the time they were done, it was night again, and both were tired. That night, they made a fire under the branches of the sacred tree, and Nephis cooked them food. Her cooking was as delicious as ever, and the quiet rustling of leaves made for a tranquil atmosphere. However, this was the first time since the Dark Island that they shared a proper meal with just the two of them enjoying it. It was so strange. Ananke had not been with them for long, but her absence felt like a gaping hole. Perhaps it was because Sunny and Nephis had witnessed her as a frail old woman, a vigorous matron, a charming young lady, and an innocent child that their time together felt like a lifetime. That lifetime was now behind them, and new hardships awaited ahead. Time was relentless, washing away all things, both inconsequential and those they held dear. On the second day, their efforts to prepare the ship for the voyage were more fruitful. With the cargo hold free of debris, they could neatly store everything that was valuable enough to hold on to there. The main deck was soon cleared. Sunny even washed it, trying to get rid of the soot, grime, and something that resembled dried blood. Or rather, he made Fiend do it while resting in the shade of the sacred tree and sipping on cold water from the endless spring. On the third day, they cleared one of the two mess halls. After that, however, Sunny and Nephis stopped. They decided to leave the rest of the inner compartments alone, at least until reaching Fallen Grace. They briefly considered cleaning one of the other cabins to have separate sleeping quarters, but eventually dropped that idea. It was not like they were unaccustomed to spending the nights in close proximity to each other anyway. Plus, it was safer. Neither of them knew when a sudden attack could come, so staying together was a more pragmatic choice. And more familiar. Finally, on the fourth day, they started to work on the sails. Repairing them was much more arduous of a task than Sunny had imagined, but unexpectedly, he turned out to be excellent at it. Who would have thought? Being good with thread and needle was the last thing Sunny had expected when starting to learn the mysterious sorcery of the Demon of Fate, but that was exactly the side effect he was benefiting from right now. Still, the progress was slow because of just how damaged the sails of the chainbreaker were. Not to mention that they had to take them down, patch them up, and then fasten the sails back up. The masts, booms, and spars required some repairs to be done too. That task was accomplished by Nephis with the help of the materials they had brought from Weave or salvaged from the debris of the ghost ship and the Dark Shaper. On the seventh day, they were done with everything they could accomplish in a short amount of time. The chainbreaker had transformed. There were still burn marks and scars on its hull, and the main deck still gaped with wide holes, however. The largest of them were now covered with wooden boards, and it was clear of debris. Saint was standing on the front of the ship with a bow in her hands, serving as their vanguard. Nightmare was hiding in the shadows nearby, while Fiend was protecting the sacred tree. Nephis stepped into the runic circle at the stern of the ancient vessel. The circle itself was inactive, but it was still the natural position to take if one wanted to hold the two steering oars of the flying ship. Granted, one of those oars would be useless for now, since it controlled ascent and descent, and the chainbreaker was unable to fly. Sunny was standing by her side. He looked at Nephis and asked, his voice full of anticipation, which was hard not to feel after a whole week of hard labor to prepare for this moment. "Are you ready?" Placing her hand on the steering oars, she nodded. "Let's go. We wasted enough time in the future already." Turning away, he inhaled deeply and looked at the length of the graceful vessel. When Noctis had owned it, there was a crew of wooden sailor dolls to work the ship. When the firekeepers claimed it, there were awakened to do the same. Now, however, there were only Sunny and Nephis had to remain at the stern to guide the chainbreaker. So, it was his job to work the sails. Since Sunny had no intention of jumping from mast to mast like a monkey, whatever a monkey was, he concentrated and called upon the shadows. A few moments later, Tenebrose arms manifested themselves into existence all over the ship, pulling on the ropes. It took some concentration to control them all at once, but after the grueling education of the Antarctic campaign, Sunny was more than proficient in using shadow manifestation. The sails slowly rose and then filled with wind. Coming back to life, the ancient ship turned to face downstream, and then slowly started accelerating. "It's moving." They were finally on their way to Fallen Grace. Chapter 1339, Moving On. The chainbreaker was steadily advancing down the great river. The gale Nephis could summon by uttering its name was not powerful enough to push the ship as fast as it had pushed the ketch, but to their luck, the winds were blowing in the same direction. Carried both by their power and the current of time, the graceful vessel rushed forward at great speed. All around them, there was nothing but sunlight and sparkling water. The vast expanse of the great river was beautiful and exhilarating, of course. Great horrors were hiding behind the deceptive facade of its beauty. But nothing had attacked them yet. Life went on. Sitting in the shade of the sacred tree, Sonny felt strangely indignant about that fact. He had been constantly busy during the week they spent patching up the battered ship, which was a mercy. Now that there was really nothing for him to do, Sonny found himself feeling numb and hollow. His lightless soul seemed even darker than usual these days. With a sigh, he closed his eyes and concentrated on the calming sound of the rustling leaves. Just how much can a person endure? He was tired of loss. He was also tired of losing. Sometimes it feels like I was better off not caring about anyone except myself. Those were the days, weren't they? As he smiled crookedly, a familiar voice suddenly resounded from above. Do you mean the days of being a frightened, pathetic, miserable little wretch that not a single person in the world cared about in turn? Well, I suppose it's indeed the best you deserve. That's how you'll end up anyway, eventually. Opening his eyes, Sonny looked up with a dark expression. The sin of solace was standing above him as if nothing had happened. The loathsome wraith looked like he always had, exactly like Sonny. The bastard was even wearing a perfect copy of Ananke's mantle. His face was full of cold contempt. Sonny scoffed. Wow, look who decided to show up. I thought you chose to crawl back into whatever pit that had spawned you and never come back. Where the hell have you been? The apparition smirked. Maybe I just got sick of watching you fail, lose, and get people killed all the time. Even imaginary creatures like me have a limit, you know? Ah, of course you don't. You don't know anything. The fool that you are. Sonny stared at him for a while, silent. His eyes were cold and somber. Eventually he shook his head and said evenly, For someone who hates me so much, you sure are too helpful. Why save me from the mad prince if you feel that way? Don't you think that you owe me an explanation? The sin of solace laughed. Owe you? And you even have the audacity to call someone mad after spouting such nonsense. I owe you nothing. He shook his head, then said with a derisive smile, Let's make something clear. I did not save you. I just saved myself from having to endure more misery. Being stuck with a hateful worm like you is already bad enough, but being stuck with you if you become defiled, gods, that would be truly insufferable. Sonny tilted his head, thinking, So the secret the Mad Prince wanted to tell me was truly dangerous enough to turn me into a defiled. Or was it? Was he supposed to believe anything that the sin of solace said? The sword wraith acted like an independent being, and in a sense it was, but the source of that being was still Sonny himself. Therefore the bastard could not know anything that he himself did not know. The sin of solace was a part of his mind after all. Wasn't he? Sonny frowned. To be honest, I have no idea what that thing is anymore. He had figured out the nature of the sword wraith in Antarctica, and had even gotten a good grasp of how to deal with the apparition. But once they entered the tomb of Ariel, that nature seemed to have changed without any explanation. Why had it changed, and how? Was it the influence of the tomb itself? It had been built by the demon of dread, after all, from whose whisper the curse that caused the sword wraith to manifest was born. Or was there something more sinister at play? Staring at the sin of solace, Sonny asked, What are you really? How did you know that the mad prince in my dream was dangerous? Why did you try to stop him from subjecting me to corruption? The apparition grinned. Without saying anything, he lingered for a while, then looked down and touched the sleeve of Ananke's dark mantle. By the way, what a wonderful mantle. You should really get more people killed and collect a piece of clothing from each one. Then we'll be able to add an apparel section to the brilliant emporium. Ah, shame you didn't think of that in Antarctica. Sonny growled and swiped at the grinning apparition, but he was already gone. The sword wraith had disappeared just as suddenly as he had appeared. That bastard. Gritting his teeth, Sonny leaned back and stared at the swaying branches of the sacred tree. He was full of dark anger, but the appearance of the sin of solace had distracted him from his melancholy, at least, until those last words plunged him right back into dejection. He sighed. I'll learn the truth eventually. For now, he had felt better when he was busy, so the best solution for this dark mood would be to make himself busy once again. Controlling the sails did not take much of his attention, so Sunny had to do something else. Luckily, there was a lot for him to do. He had to continue studying the estuary key. He also had to weave a lot of memories to help Nightmare ascend, as well as come up with ways to make the members of the cohort stronger. Let's get to it then. There is a week or two left before we reach Fallen Grace. I can achieve a lot in 2 weeks. Abandoning the shade of the sacred tree, Sunny went to the bow of the chainbreaker, where Ananke's ketch was fastened to the deck. He and Nephis had retrieved it from the water before setting sail, planning to use the ketch as a lifeboat if the need arose. Summoning the shadow chair, he placed it near the battered sailboat, sat down, and looked at the glistening expanse of the great river. Then Sunny sighed and contemplated what task he would tackle first. Chapter 1340, New Perspective. Sunny remained motionless for a while, thinking. After a few moments, he unconsciously began to fiddle with the hems of the black mantle's sleeves. The smooth fabric glided across his fingertips, making them tingle a little. Eventually, his gaze settled on it. Sunny tilted his head. Abandoning his previous plans, he stood up and took off the mantle instead. Then he sat back down and laid it across his lap. I wonder. He doubted that it was a simple piece of clothing. It was the attire of a nightmare spell priest, after all, most likely passed down to Ananke from her mother, the original priestess who had entered the tomb of Ariel with the first wave of outsiders. The corpse under the cathedral in the Dark City had been wearing the same dark garment. So, it had to have some secrets. Sunny hesitated for a few moments. Unlike Weaver's mask, the black mantle was not a memory. Otherwise, it would have disappeared with Ananke. There were some memories that persisted after the death of their owners, of course, like the dawn shard that Nephis had found on the remains of the first lord of the Bright Castle. But the nebulous mantle was not one of those either. Otherwise, it would have bound itself to Sunny the moment he picked it up. It seemed to be a perfectly mundane robe, albeit sewn from some mystical material. Nevertheless, he shifted his perception and tried to look within the mantle, just in case. He was not disappointed. Huh? There was indeed a spell weave hidden within Ananke's mantle, and it was a strange one. How odd. Sunny studied the weave of ethereal strings with a perplexed expression. There were all the elements that a spell weave was supposed to be made of, a radiant nexus, and an intricate tapestry of essence threads. However, the pattern of the ethereal strings was very different from what Sunny was accustomed to. It was elegant and vast, but how could he put it? The weave of the dark mantle was infinitely less labyrinthine than that of every memory in his possession. It was by no means crude, but also not nearly as complicated as them. He studied the strange spell weave for a few minutes, then leaned back, bewildered. It's not there. When Sunny studied the weave of a new memory, he always searched for the familiar patterns first, to use as a starting point. The universal patterns that all memories shared, and which were the first sorcery he himself had woven. The connection to the soul of the owner, the ability to manifest from and dissipate into soul essence, the ability to self-repair in the soul sea. But the weave of Ananke's mantle lacked these fundamental patterns. He blinked a couple of times. What? Suddenly Sunny realized a simple fact. Although all the memories he had seen shared these traits, that was simply because they had all come from only 2 sources. One source was the nightmare spell, and the other source was Sunny himself. More than that, his knowledge of weaving had mostly come from studying the weaves created by the nightmare spell. The memories created by the enchanters of valor weren't different either. That was because while they forged enchanted weapons using unique aspects, the spell served as an intermediary in the process. Crafting memories was an innate ability of the Valor family, not a learned skill like their knowledge of runic sorcery or Sunny's knowledge of weaving. So in the end, both sources were one and the same. But that was not the only way of going about weaving enchanted items, only the ultimate way. The weave he was looking at right now, though, had been created by someone else, perhaps by the high priest of the nightmare spell Ananke had spoken about, or by one of his students, which was why it was a sorcerous item enchanted through weaving, but not technically a memory. Sunny scratched his head. So something like that can exist too. Of course it could. The fact seemed so obvious in hindsight, and yet he had never considered such a possibility before. mostly because it was really hard for a human mind to think outside a familiar framework. Every memory Sonny had known was an item enchanted through weaving, and so he subconsciously assumed that all items enchanted through weaving were memories. But they didn't have to be like the mantle in front of him, which was a curious detail, but not exactly useful. Who wouldn't want to turn their weapon or attire into a memory? The traits of memories that everyone took for granted were supremely useful. The ability to carry a whole arsenal inside your soul alone was a boon any warrior would kill for. Swords that sharpened themselves, suits of armor that repaired any damage done to them and adjusted themselves to perfectly fit the body of the wearer. There were too many benefits to memories to count. By all accounts, they were the culmination of weaving. Well, technically, the nightmare spell itself was the culmination of weaving, but for all those who weren't inconceivable deities like the demon of fate, memories were the absolute peak of enchantment. However, Sonny's heart still skipped a beat, and his eyes glistened with dark excitement. Ananke's mantle might not have been superior to the powerful memories he possessed. At a cursory glance, its enchantments were nothing special. Its rank and tier were also not that stunning. But to him, it was a priceless treasure for a single reason. It was because its weave was different from every weave he knew, and much simpler than them at that. Sonny's whole skill as a sorcerer had come from comparing the patterns of different enchantments to each other and trying to deduce the common logic behind them. But all those enchantments followed the principles set by a single creator, the nightmare spell. Now that he had an enchanted mantle that had come from an entirely different school of weaving, his ability to compare and deduce the fundamental principles of sorcery could take a qualitative leap. It was like witnessing an entirely different framework and gaining a deeper understanding of your own by studying the differences and commonalities between them. It didn't matter how simple the spell weave of Ananke's mantle was. What mattered was that it could not only teach Sonny the unfamiliar ways of its creator, but also help him push his own skill forward by a lot. Just when he needed it, Sonny gripped the smooth fabric in his fists, staring at it intently. After a while, he said quietly, "Thank you, Ananke." With that, he cut out all distractions and concentrated on studying the odd weave. Chapter 1341, Learning the Hard Way. Sonny was more of a copycat than an actual sorcerer. Most of his repertoire consisted of recreating the weaves of various enchantments he had gleaned from his own memories, not creating those of his own. Of course, even that was already a stunning achievement. Armed with nothing but his intelligence and a bit of intuition granted to him by blood weave, as well as the ability to see weaves in the first place, he taught himself the most fundamental principles of sorcery, the wondrous sorcery of the demon of fate, which very few beings had ever been able to wield. At this point, Sonny had barely taken the first step away from blindly copying the spell weaves, tentatively trying to disassemble and modify them to serve his whims. The siege souvenir, a unique memory he had created to slay the fallen titan Goliath, was the result of these attempts. But Sonny was still a mere novice, all things considered. He was leagues away from true sorcerers like the mysterious being who had created the estuary key, for example. That weave was simply beyond his imagination. He couldn't even imagine how long it would take him to reach the same transcendent level of mastery. A few hundred years, perhaps, a millennium? So, Sonny had no illusions about his achievements. They were rather astonishing when compared to other modern awakened, but that was only because most of those awakened knew absolutely nothing about sorcery. In the grand scheme of things, his skill was negligible. Or so he thought before taking a look at the weave of Ananke's mantle. Huh? Wait, what is going on? The tapestry of ethereal strings shone in the darkness, laid bare in front of his altered eyes. It was much simpler than the infinitely complex weaves created by the spell, but still wasn't he comprehending it a little bit too fast? It was almost like an open book. That part of the pattern is responsible for enhancing durability. That one has something to do with fire. Ah, it's making the mantle non-flammable. That one makes it waterproof. Then, what do these strings do? Looks familiar, right? If I scale the size and complexity of this part by a lot, it would be similar to a fragment of living stone. The basic structure is the same, which is also the basic structure of the universal restorative trait of all memories. So it's self-repair then. Sonny opened his eyes wide and leaned back. What the hell? How was he suddenly so good at reading weaves before? He could only feel a slight inkling of understanding about the nature of certain enchantments, but now he was somehow able to see the intent behind various sections of the ethereal tapestry almost clearly. Despite it being a completely unfamiliar way of weaving, it just looked very understandable. Sonny blinked a couple of times. Don't tell me. A sudden guess appeared in his mind. He gave the black mantle a dubious look, then let out a small laugh. I'll be damned. The weaves the spell created were infinitely ingenious and near perfect, and as a result, they were all unimaginably complex and intricate. It was to such a degree that Sonny had to spend weeks studying the simplest ones, and even that was only due to his better-than-average memory and innate talent. He had been bashing his head against this daedal wall for about 2 years now, and for every grain of knowledge he gained, there were 100 he failed to decipher and comprehend. The weave of Ananke's mantle was also elaborate enough to make a person dizzy, but it was nowhere near the complexity of the tapestries the spell created. And so it seemed that after being tempered by the latter, Sonny had grown skilled enough to more or less discern the general flow of the former. It was as though he had been learning to read by perusing an abstruse epic poem without ever even laying eyes on an alphabet book. The weave of the mantle, meanwhile, was not primitive enough to be called an alphabet, but it was something that a middle schooler would be able to read. And after braving the weaves of the spell, Sonny had learned enough to be considered one such middle schooler. He covered his face with his palm and remained motionless for a while. Right, it's just like being sent to the forgotten shore. After returning from there, we were also constantly bewildered by how weak normal awakened seemed. Greater obstacles forge greater strength, as long as you can actually survive them, of course, which most of us didn't. He was both the survivor of the forgotten shore and of learning sorcery by studying the spell at work. As such, the work of actual weavers was strangely accessible. Sonny shook his head, then calmed down and looked back to Ananke's mantle. Right. This is great news, then. Not only will I be able to understand its enchantments faster, I will also be able to use them as a replacement for a textbook and propel my weaving forward. Hopefully, I mean. It's still not exactly an alphabet book. He spent the rest of the day studying the odd weave. It was not simple by any means, but after suffering the appalling complexity of the immaculate weaves created by the spell, Sonny almost enjoyed the process. In the end, he realized that the black mantle was not that mysterious of an item. The masks the priests wore were the true treasures, while their attire was mostly meant to serve a practical purpose. It was still a precious heirloom. Of course, the fabric itself seemed to be a transcendent material, very similar to the night silk from which Noctis had once sewn him a garment. In fact, it might have been the very same silk. It was fashioned in a way that obfuscated the wearer's physical features and enchanted to be supremely durable, stealthy, and enduring all qualities that the persecuted priests of the nightmare spell would have needed in their perilous journeys. A perfect attire for heretical evangelists who often found themselves being hated and hunted by the people they were trying to convert. Or an ill-fated awakened who often found himself having to deal with all kinds of unspeakable horrors. Sonny hesitated for a while, then summoned Weaver's Needle and got to work modifying the weave of the nebulous black mantle. Black threads joined the ethereal strings of soul essence. By the time the 7 suns drowned in the water, and the great river shone with iridescent radiance, he lowered his hands and heard the spell whispering into his ear. You have received a memory, Ananke's mantle. Chapter 1342, Nebulous Mantle. It didn't take a lot of effort to add the basic patterns of a memory to the weave of the black mantle. That was what he had been doing over and over again to supply the brilliant emporium with inventory after all. By now, weaving them was almost muscle memory. They did not put a lot of pressure on a weave either. Even dormant memories of the first tier could bear the weight. The nexus of the mantle had been fashioned out of a transcendent soul shard, so Sonny did not even have to integrate a second node into the ethereal tapestry. It was a bit tricky to make the 2 different schools of weaving flow into each other. But since Sonny's method was the more intricate one and not the other way around, solving that problem proved to be trivial. Just like that, he gained a new memory at the cost of a few shadow strings. Enjoying the view of the shimmering great river, Sonny smiled tiredly. Studying hard was an exhausting process, but he welcomed the fatigue. It was a sign that he had made progress. He didn't regret turning the mantle into a memory, either, even if it wasn't useful. He would have been reluctant to part with it. All things that weren't stored within his soul would be lost at the end of the nightmare. If he had been cognizant of that fact earlier, he would have had a better memento of Noctis than a luxurious chair. Although he had nothing really to complain about, considering that the shadow chair was actually one of his most valued memories. Sunny summoned the runes. Ananke's mantle was there at the end of the list. Even though he more or less already knew what the runes would say, he still read them. Memory, Ananke's mantle. Memory rank, transcendent. Memory tier, I. Memory type, garment. Sunny smiled faintly. Garments were a rare type of memory, since the better ones were classified as armor by the spell. Those that did not make the cut were generally less useful, but their benefit was that they could be worn in conjunction with an armor-type memory, like the Dark Wing which he had been using ever since the Forgotten Shore. He continued reading, feeling a pinching pain in his heart. Memory description. This mantle once belonged to Ananke of Weave, priestess of the nightmare spell. She met the children of Weaver in a nightmare and guided them across the perilous currents of time. Her wisdom was radiant, and her kindness was a blessing. May she rest in peace. The spell had not written that description. Sunny had written it himself. He had tried to come up with the right words, but they all rang hollow. In the end, he had simply written a few awkward sentences, not knowing what else to do. Unsatisfied, Sunny looked away from the description. No one else is going to see this description anyway, only Nephis and me. Eventually he grimaced and concentrated on the enchantments. The runes read, Memory enchantments. Enduring, concealing, tasteless. Enduring made the mantle durable, resistant against the elements, and capable of repairing itself. Concealing masked the presence of its wearer, the mystical kind of presence, powerful, awakened, possessed. Tasteless, though, was a rather strange enchantment, if it could even be called that. From what Sunny could see, it didn't do anything. It was just there, containing nothing except for its name and description. The description read, Tasteless enchantment description. Why did it have to be black? Huh? Which was rather perplexing. The people wearing the mantle would not have been able to read the description unless they were sorcerers themselves, which most of the priests of the nightmare spell had not been. So, the mysterious creator of the enchanted garment seemed to have left that odd message for no one in particular. Sunny shook his head. That person must have been a bit of a lunatic also. What are they talking about? Everything looks better in black. Each rune of the description demanded essence strings to be wasted, after all, and weaving them took both effort and time. So only a crazy person would go around weaving unnecessary runes. Sunny coughed, remembering his own track record. Back in the Antarctic Center, he had once sent Nephis a message through a memory called, I am stuck in an endless tunnel full of true darkness. How the hell do I get out? Ask Cassie. Was there really a need to add the hell to the actual question? No. But did it feel good to add it? Hell yes. Looking down in embarrassment, he put on the tasteful black mantle and rose. Leaving the shadow chair by the catch, Sunny rubbed his face and went to find Nephis. He had gained a lot of insights from studying the weave left behind by an unknown sorcerer. It felt like his understanding of sorcery was on the precipice of taking a qualitative leap in the coming days. He would have to do a lot more work, of course, as well as digest all his gains. However, Sunny already had a few ideas on how to proceed. Right now, he lacked the soul shards to do anything significant. There were a few that Ananke had used while fishing to lure the nightmare creatures, but those were of lesser ranks. He was meaning to use them to create memories for Nightmare to consume. That said, he still had the supreme soul shard that they had scavenged from the black turtle, which meant that he could potentially create a supreme memory. Of course, it was not that simple. Scaling an enchantment was not as simple as replacing the nexus of a weave. Most of them could not be scaled at all, and those that could required the weave itself to be vastly modified and improved. After all, strings made out of awakened soul essence could not endure the flow of transcendent energies. The patterns themselves had to be adjusted as well, to account for the increased burden. Not to mention that enchantments were usually limited by their own nature, infusing them with more potent essence would simply be a waste. It was a proper mess. However, when Sunny asked himself how to empower the members of the cohort and make them capable of facing the perils of the Tomb of Ariel better, he couldn't help but think back to the Forgotten Shore, where they had also been forced to fight abominations 1 or even 2 ranks above them. How had they been able to survive that crucible? There were a lot of reasons why they had, but one of the most significant ones was a single memory. A memory that could empower all other memories, and which had been the primary goal of their lethal expedition across the Crimson Labyrinth to the outskirts of the Hollow Mountains. The Dawn Shard. So what if Sunny did not create a supreme memory, but instead elevated the Dawn Shard to the supreme rank? Wouldn't that be the most efficient way of making the cohort stronger? Chapter 1343, Crown of Dawn. The deck of the Chainbreaker was dark, illuminated only by the pale glow of the iridescent water that gleamed below. The radiance of the great river at night was usually beautiful, but today it seemed ghostly. Sunny was not disturbed by the darkness, of course, but he had to think about Nifis as well. We should probably place a few lanterns around the ship. The light of the lanterns could potentially attract nightmare creatures, but that was not really a problem. Not because they were not wary of the abominations, but because gaining their attention was more or less inevitable. Thinking about when their first battle would happen, Sunny approached the stern of the ship. Nefis was still standing in the runic circle, holding the steering oar. There was a luminous memory placed on the deck near her feet, creating a small island of warm orange glow in the ocean of darkness. In that orange light, her beautiful face was pale and lifeless. She had been guiding the ship the entire day, and the accumulated fatigue was taking its toll. He listened to the wind, determining its direction. It's blowing from the future. Stepping into the light, Sunny smiled and gestured to the oar. Go rest. I'll take it from here. He could not use the sorcery of names yet, but since the winds were on their side, the Chainbreaker could do without its support for now. Losing some speed was not going to delay them by much. In fact, both Saint and Fiend were intelligent enough to keep the ship on course. Sunny preferred to let them stand guard for now, though. Studying his face for a few moments, Nefis nodded and let go of the oar. As she stepped out of the runic circle, Sunny entered it. Wait. He caught her hand in his own and lingered for a few moments. She stared at him with an incredulous expression. That memory of yours, the Crown of Dawn, can you lend it to me for a few days? Nefis raised an eyebrow. Sure? Why? Sunny simply shrugged. I want to see if I can improve it a little. Don't get your hopes up, though. Chances are nothing will end up happening. It's worth a try, at least. She hesitated for a couple of moments. Then, a spark of energy traveled from her hand into his own. The spell whispered, its voice as enigmatic as ever. You have received a memory Dawn Shard. Sunny smiled. Thank you. Now go rest. I'll wake you up if some abyssal horror attacks us from below the waves, I promise. Nefis stared at him somberly. You could have just said sweet dreams, you know. He grinned. Oh, I do, but where's the fun in that? Shaking her head, Nefis freed her cool hand from his grasp, picked up the luminous memory, and left. Sunny remained standing in the darkness for a while, staring at the empty space where she had just been. Then he sighed, glanced at his empty hand, and placed it on the steering oar. Ah, it's so lonesome, sailing across a river of unholy Titan's blood in the dark. With that, Sunny summoned the Dawn Shard. A simple band of bright metal appeared in his free hand, decorated with a single gem. The Crown of Dawn did not look that impressive at first glance. It was more austere than opulent, and yet that simple circlet was the reason Sunny, the members of the cohort, and the Firekeepers had been able to return from the Forgotten Shore. Its single enchantment was extraordinarily powerful. The Dawn Shard empowered all memories in a large radius around it. Back on the Forgotten Shore, that empowerment had been strong enough to elevate the awakened weapons of the Dreamer army to resemble ascended ones in terms of lethality. Which was an inconceivable boon, considering that there was no limit to the number of memories the Crown of Dawn could enhance. It was a passive enchantment as well. That was how they had been able to slay fallen abominations. Sadly, its usefulness diminished more and more as Nephis and her allies grew stronger and acquired better equipment after escaping the Forgotten Shore. The Dawn Shard could still empower ascended memories to a substantial degree, but nowhere near elevating them to an entire new rank. The effect on transcendent memories was even more modest. Considering the type of enemies Sunny and the members of the cohort would have to face in the third nightmare, that augmentation was all but insignificant. But what if he elevated the Crown of Dawn itself from an ascended memory to a supreme one? Sunny doubted that he would be able to perform a flawless alteration. But even if he managed to make the Dawn Shard as powerful as a transcendent memory by outfitting it with a supreme Soul Shard, the result would already increase their chances of prevailing against great nightmare creatures by a lot. Before, he would not have even dared to try, but now he had two advantages. The first one was the push studying Ananke's mantle had given him. The second one was the nature of the Crown of Dawn itself. The first time Nephis had used it, Sunny saw the weaves of his memories growing more radiant, each nexus and ethereal string shining with brighter light. The augmentation either strengthened the memories by empowering their weaves, or made the weaves stronger to withstand the increased power of the memories. In any case, the result was the same. The essence strings became more robust, and the first memory the Dawn Shard empowered was itself. Its weave was always augmented by its own effect. Perhaps that was the reason why this ascended memory could possess such an unreasonable power. So, it was more or less a perfect memory for Sunny to try and transplant the Supreme Shard into. His major concern was that strings weaved from lesser essence would not be able to withstand the burden of channeling superior energies. But what if they were made more durable by those very same energies? The weave of the Crown of Dawn was much too complex for him to recreate. But modifying it was different probably. He wouldn't know until he took a look. Sunny shifted his perception and peered into the bright metal, trying to discern the underlying weave of the shard memory. Soon, an inconceivable tapestry of ethereal strings appeared in front of his eyes, shining in the darkness. Holding the oar, he smiled wistfully and took a deep breath. Let's get to work. Chapter 1444 on course. The weave of a shard memory was subtly different from an ordinary one. They possessed some unique qualities, after all, like the ability to remain in existence after the owner's death, or the hidden purpose of manifesting the oath keys after all 7 had been gathered in one place. Luckily, Sunny possessed 2 shard memories of his own, the Midnight and Moonlight shards, so he already knew how to find and isolate these sections of the tapestry, which was supposed to make the task of deciphering the rest of it easier. In theory. In practice, the spell weave of a shard memory was even more labyrinthine than that of a normal memory. Sunny had managed to gain a sufficient level of understanding of the Midnight Shard, enough so to apply a part of its enchantment to the Siege souvenir, but the Moonlight Shard still remained beyond his grasp, which was a shame, because the ghostly stiletto possessed one of the most useful enchantments Sunny had ever seen. It was able to appear instantly, without wasting any time manifesting itself from the sparks of essence. If Sunny could master that single enchantment, all memories he created would gain a lethal edge. The more powerful a memory was, the longer it took to manifest. So, as the awakened reached higher ranks of power, they had to be more and more strategic about when to summon their memories. Considering that he was unable to master the weave of the Moonlight Shard to this day, the Dawn Shard could very well prove to be a similarly tough nut to crack. As Sunny stared at the vast tapestry of ethereal strings hidden within the band of bright metal, the corner of his eye twitched. Yeah, this was not going to be easy, but I can do it. He was certain of it. Recreating the whole weave was out of the question, but modifying it armed with the insights he had gained and would gain from Ananke's mantle, he felt confident in his chances. It was just going to take a lot of effort and a lot of time. How do I transplant a new nexus without collapsing the whole weave? How do I ensure that superior essence actually produces a superior result? How do I prevent the less resilient sections of the weave from being torn apart by the increased burden on them? All these questions required answers. There were many more problems to solve as well. Sunny had never tried something quite as ambitious as turning a powerful ascended memory into a tremendously more powerful supreme memory. One thing was certain. It would require an inhuman level of finesse and precision. It would also require a lot of additional essence strings, and a lot of ingenuity, of course. The task was daunting, but Sonny did not feel discouraged. Instead, he felt almost excited. It beat patching up sails or drowning in a foul mood, at least. Comfortably resting his back against the bending surface of the tall apluster, he moved the oar a little and peered into the shimmering spell weave. By the time the 7 suns rose from the water, Sonny felt like his head was on the verge of exploding. However, he also felt satisfied with his progress. Standing in the runic circle at the stern of the graceful vessel, Sonny was holding the dawn shard in one hand. His other hand was resting on the steering oar. His other 4 hands danced in the air and weaved strings from his flowing shadow essence. Those were manifested from the shadows, of course. Sonny had been long accustomed to using an additional pair of shadow arms. It was not too hard for him, considering his experiences in the second nightmare. The most difficult part was actually learning how to manifest sufficiently intricate hands from shadows, but he had mastered that in Antarctica as well. While studying the weave of the Crown of Dawn, though, he understood that the finesse he would need to alter it was not something a human could achieve. 2 hands and 10 fingers were simply not enough, and neither were 4 hands and 20 fingers, at least not at his current level of skill. So, remembering his dream of being Weaver, Sonny tried to manifest not 2 but 6 additional arms. Finally controlling 8 hands at the same time had turned out too much for his mind. However, even with the help of the Shroud of Dusk, he could not manage that many. It was one thing to pull on the ropes to raise sails or rip nightmare creatures to shreds. Those were crude actions that did not require a lot of finesse. Weaving, on the other hand, demanded absolute precision. Displacing a string by a hair's breadth could mean the difference between success and failure. In the end, Sonny had to dismiss 2 shadow arms and be satisfied with only having 6 hands. Who walks around with only 6 arms? That's simply unreasonable embarrassing, really. At that moment, Nephis emerged from the lower deck, rubbing her face sleepily. She glanced at Sonny and nodded, then froze and looked at him again. After a while, she shook her head slightly, sighed, and continued on her way to examine the ship and practice her swordsmanship. Some time later, the smell of delicious food being cooked reached Sonny's nose. He smiled. Time for breakfast, I guess. Commanding Saint to replace him at the steering oar, Sonny dismissed the dawn shard and went to find Nephis. They ate in the shade of the sacred tree, enjoying the warm sunlight and the refreshing breeze. After a while, she asked, "Aren't you going to rest?" Sonny leaned back, satisfied, then shook his head. "Not yet. I can go without sleep for a couple more days. There's a lot I want to achieve before we reach Fallen Grace." He had to continue studying Ananke's mantle, alter the spell weave of Dawn Shard, create memories for Nightmare to consume, and more. She frowned a little. "Mental fatigue will slow you down. Your mind needs time to recover too." He smiled. "I know. I have the Shroud of Graceless Dusk, remember? The same dusk we are on our way to visit. It helps me recover from exhaustion, both physical and mental, faster. I'll be all right. Time waited for no man, and there was no rest for the wicked." Sonny was not overestimating himself. He just knew exactly how much he could endure. Nephis hesitated for a few moments, then nodded. "All right. Suit yourself." He suddenly remembered something. After I am done with the Dawn Shard, I want you to teach me how to use the Sorcery of Names. I didn't want to split my focus before, but now I feel like it can help me advance faster in my own skills. Probably. All right?" She nodded again. After finishing the breakfast, they used the esoteric navigation tools to make sure that the ship had not strayed off course. Then, Nephis took her place in the runic circle again, while Sonny sat on the deck a few meters away and continued studying the Crown of Dawn. Several days passed in that manner. The two of them spent most of their time together, and some time apart. They resumed their sword training, involving Saint as well. The deck of the graceful ship was often filled with the sound of clashing steel. When the two of them were not sparring, though, Sonny had a different task for the graceful knight. Now that Fiend had grown into a proper devil, it was time for him to learn combat mastery too. The steel shadow's most fearsome weapons were his claws and teeth, so Sunny instructed Saint to teach him in hand-to-hand combat. Since she was a master of all types of combat, that did not stump her one bit. Hearing Fiend crash into the wooden deck over and over again, Sunny smiled from the corner of his mouth and continued weaving. Memories of his own painful training with Saint, all that time ago in the Dark City, made him feel a bit of compassion for the ravenous steel ogre. Of course, the lucky bastard possessed the Marvel attribute, which made him capable of learning new things at astonishing speed. Sunny was actually curious to see which of them would absorb Saint's lessons faster. Granted, Sunny had learned combat mastery from her while hunting down lethal abominations in the Dark City in order to survive. Fiend, in comparison, had all his needs cared for by a kind, generous, and benevolent master. Who wouldn't learn fast with such a benefactor? Everything was peaceful for these first few days. Then, they suffered the first attack. Chapter 1345, Monster Herders. You are wasting your time. You will definitely fail. Just give up. You know you're not smart enough to accomplish anything worthwhile. Do you really want to make the woman holding your leash stronger? How foul. Your collection of failures just keeps growing, huh? Ignoring the sin of solace, Sunny leaned against Ananke's catch as he studied the dawn shard. His shadow hands continued to weave strings of essence. His concentration remained unbroken. He even welcomed the derisive comments. The more the hateful wraith berated him, the more Sunny felt like he was on the right track. The sin of solace would not have bothered to interfere if there was no chance of success, after all. It was not in his nature to bet against Sunny when there were no stakes. What, you are ignoring me now? Or have you forgotten how to speak? Sunny threw a calm glance at the apparition, then turned back to the crown of dawn. Will speak when you tell me how you knew about the Mad Prince. The sin of solace scoffed. Gods. Why do I even bother? I am sick of this tired routine. He laughed bitterly, then added in a resigned tone. But there's nothing else to do. How boring. The chain breaker was swaying gently underneath them. Saint was standing guard at the bow. Fiend and Nightmare were guarding the sacred tree, and Nephis was at the stern, steering the ship. The seven suns had already descended into the depths of the great river, and the deck was illuminated by a scattering of lanterns. The water glowed softly, diluting the impenetrable darkness of the night with ghostly opalescence. Sunny smiled faintly. Find a hobby. The sin of solace stared at him, unamused. Then he turned to the bow of the ship and sighed. At least there's spectacle. Sunny paid it no attention. Then he hurriedly dismissed the dawn shard and jumped to his feet. Crap! Lunging forward, he felt the chain breaker shudder as a violent wave hit it from the side. Neph, we are under attack. Out there in front of the graceful ship, about 100 meters away, the water had grown bleak and restless. A vast and ancient shadow was rising from the depths, surrounded by countless smaller ones. Twisting tendrils stretched toward the surface. Standing on the bow, Saint calmly raised her warbow and drew its string. Pure darkness flowed from the seams of her onyx armor, enveloping the black arrow that had manifested itself out of thin air. A moment later, she set it loose. The arrow disappeared into the glowing water without a trace. You have slain a corrupted beast, drowned outcast. Your shadow grows stronger. Saint was already drawing the bow again. At the same time, long tentacles exploded from beneath the waves, rising above the chain breaker like dark, glistening towers. Shuddering, Sunny remembered his first night on the forgotten shore. Damnation, I'm going to have to repair the sails again. Smaller shapes were rising from the restless water and scaling the sides of the ship, swift and nimble. Sunny saw the pale glow reflecting on the blades of crude spears. In the darkness below the tree, Fiend's eyes ignited with an incinerating red glow. The shadows around him moved, releasing a tenebrous stallion with adamantine fangs from their embrace. An explosion of white radiance drowned the stern of the chain breaker in blinding light. Go. I'll handle things here. Hearing Neph's response, Sunny ran past Saint and jumped over the railing without ever slowing down. A moment later, he plunged into the cold water, rushing to meet the horror that was rising from the depths. It was there, a massive shape that stretched its giant tentacles toward the moving vessel. Enormous, ancient, and harrowing Sunny felt hundreds of eyes pierce him with an inhuman gaze, all belonging to the same creature. A tyrant. Sunny's figure grew indistinct, surrounded by countless shadows. Then, the maw of a furious sea serpent emerged from the darkness, bellowing in rage as it shot into the boiling depths. The long serpentine body followed, encased in onyx armor. The great river stirred. Some time later, Sunny climbed onto the deck of the chainbreaker and huffed, red drops falling from his hair. He was drenched in blood, of course. That blood was not his. There was a sizable sack in his hands. That sack was actually Ananke's mantle, which was resistant to water, its sleeves tied in a knot. Inside the improvised sack, two sizable transcendent soul shards glimmered softly in the dark. Sunny checked on them, then looked around the deck. Why did I even wash it? Why did I even have Fiend wash it? The deck was littered with corpses. The creatures that had died here, cut, torn apart, and burned to ashes, resembled a weird mix between humans and sea creatures. They had humanoid torsos with pale skin, while their legs were replaced by long, powerful black tentacles. Their bodies were emaciated, with ghastly growths covering them like barnacles. The sight was both repulsive and inspiring. Saint, Fiend, and Nightmare earned me a few shadow fragments. Even better, there are plenty of soul shards to be harvested in addition to the ones I brought back. The depth dweller he had killed was not a tyrant in the end. It was just a huge, nasty, corrupted monster. It seemed that these drowned outcasts were not its minions. Instead, the smaller creatures appeared to have herded the enormous monstrosity, using it to attack larger prey. Waste of essence. If Sunny knew that in advance, he would have used the nimble catch and the sin of solace to cut the depth dweller down. He froze for a moment, suddenly stunned by how odd the situation was. Wait, since when am I so dismissive of corrupted monsters? That thing could have easily finished me if I wasn't careful. Damn it. Am I becoming arrogant? Arrogance gets people killed. Sunny was strong and skilled, but he wasn't invulnerable. Even though he could easily slaughter dozens of fallen abominations or face corrupted ones without fear, each of them could very well end his life with one strike. Maybe two, considering the defensive properties of the marble shell. I better correct this attitude fast. Oh my, what a rare moment of self-reflection. You should correct the rest of your nasty personality while you're at it. Maybe then people won't find you as uncomfortable to be around as they do now. Looking up darkly, Sunny saw the sword wraith staring at him with disdain. The sin of solace was still as annoying as he had been before the attack. Nothing much changed, honestly. If there was one thing, though, it was that Sunny had plenty of soul shards to turn into memories now. Standing up and summoning his clothes back, he looked around and noticed Fiend. The fearsome devil seemed to be hiding from him behind the tree. Sunny smiled. Come here, buddy. Fiend hesitated for a few moments, then reluctantly walked over. Sunny pointed to the gruesome corpses. Harvest the soul shards, then clean this mess up. The devil's shoulders fell. Sunny patted Fiend on one of these shoulders. Well, he wanted to, but the bastard was too tall to do it comfortably. Plus, his body was covered in all kinds of sharp spikes. So, in the end, the gesture ended up being rather reserved. Oh, and you can eat all these guys. Stuff yourself as much as you want. Now that your primary attributes are set, you don't need to maintain a diet anymore. Ravenous sparks ignited in the depths of Fiend's fiery eyes. Chapter 1346, Faltering Star. Fiend feasted on the corpses of the drowned outcasts with delight. The sight of the metallic devil gorging himself on the dead abominations was a bit gruesome, but mercifully swift. The bodies disappeared into the shadow's incinerating maw, as if they had never existed before too long. The deck was clear once again. Where does all this meat even go? This time, the infernal ogre had not gained any new attributes or abilities, which was an expected result. If the scavengers were capable of attaining new powers from each creature they devoured, Sunny would have never survived the battle with the original ravenous fiend. It had to be a rare occurrence, especially now that the Shadow's main attributes were set. It did seem like he had grown a little bit stronger, though, just as the other Shadows did when absorbing a fragment. Throwing a dubious glance at the satisfied devil, Sunny shook his head and commanded the glutton to go find a mop. While Fiend was washing the blood off the deck, Sunny and Nephis briefly examined the ship and then gathered at the stern to divide the soul shards. Let's just each take half. He looked at the small pile of shimmering crystals, calmly thinking about how to use them best. All of the shards were transcendent, considering how nonchalant he was about this unimaginable treasure trove, remembering the awe they had felt when witnessing a pair of transcendent soul shards back on the forgotten shore felt both amusing and nostalgic. Nephis simply shook her head. I'll take a quarter. Your shadows killed twice as many as I did, while you dealt with the depth dweller. That should be fair. Sunny glanced at her, hesitating. She was right. Out of the two of them, he had contributed much more to the victory. That only went to show how powerful he had grown, armed with a developed aspect legacy and 3 powerful shadows. It also meant that Nephis needed to catch up as soon as possible. And yet, 3/4 of their spoils amounted to 17 transcendent soul shards. If made into a memory and fed to Nightmare, each would give him 4 shadow fragments. That meant that the Black Stallion would be most of the way to Ascension by the time Sunny finished weaving all these memories. While Nephis was still far away from becoming a Titan, strategically strengthening Nightmare first made more sense. Sunny nodded. All right. Illuminated by the soft glimmer of the soul shards, Neph's face seemed even more reserved than usual. Was she pondering the matter of her faltering progress as well? With a sigh, Nephis took her share of the soul shards and methodically crushed them one after another, absorbing the streams of ethereal light. Then she rose and said, her tone flat, "We've wasted enough time here already. I'll go back to the steering oar." He watched her walk into the runic circle with a complicated expression. Is she still feeling uncertain of herself after the second nightmare? She has been strangely mild ever since coming back. Selfishly, I like this Nephis more. But he also missed the version of Nephis that was like an uncompromising flame. A flame that burned with enough passion and unreasonable resolve to burn down the entire world. Sunny shook his head slightly and gathered the rest of the soul shards. She is still the same. When the time comes, she'll burn brighter than the 7 suns combined. I just hope that I won't be burned with the rest of this cursed tomb when that happens. Not entirely convinced, he stored the shards in the covetous coffer and went back to peering into the complexities of spellweaves. The chainbreaker continued sailing downstream. In the next week, it was attacked several more times, for better or worse, by solitary nightmare creatures instead of groups like the drowned outcasts had been. Sunny and Nephis dealt with the grotesque depth dwellers with some effort, but not too much effort. Apart from a few shallow wounds, the biggest hurdle they faced was removing the corpse of an especially large creature from the ram of the ship, which had impaled the abomination after a purposeful and violent collision. None of the nightmare creatures were as powerful as the harrowing foes they had faced in the far reaches of the future. On the positive side, Sunny and Nephis were alive. On the negative side, they had not been able to salvage as many soul shards as they had after the first attack. Sunny didn't really mind. His time was divided between studying the weave of Ananke's mantle and concocting a tentative plan for altering the Dawn Shard. At the same time, he was creating memories from the shards in his possession. That last task was moving along slowly, since it took him roughly a whole day to weave one. That pace was only possible because his reserves of essence were fully restored each dawn and dusk, thanks to the Crown of Twilight. Still, by the end of the week, Nightmare had absorbed 28 shadow fragments, bringing the counter to 229,300. Sunny still had enough soul shards to create 10 rudimentary transcendent memories, each equivalent to 4 fragments. If nothing went wrong, the counter would reach 269,300 in 10 days. His loyal steed's ascension was drawing close. By the end of the week, he felt ready to attempt modifying the Dawn Shard. However, because of how important that endeavor was to the conquest of the third nightmare, Sunny decided to go over everything he had learned and envisioned a few more times. Putting the Crown of Dawn away and dismissing the shadow hands, he leaned against the side of the ketch and closed his eyes. I've created a sufficient length of essence thread. I've studied the spell weave of the Dawn Shard extensively. I compared the structure of the pattern surrounding the nexus with all the other memories I possess. I've grown accustomed to weaving with 6 hands. He spent 2 days meditating on his plans and mentally going over everything that could go wrong. Finally, just before dawn of the third day, Sunny opened his eyes and manifested 4 shadow arms once again. It's time to begin. Chapter 1347, Trial of Skill. The hypnotizing tapestry of the spellweave stretched in the darkness in front of him. Countless threads of ethereal light intertwined in a beautiful but seemingly chaotic pattern, centered around a radiant nexus. There had been a time when these patterns were a complete mystery to Sunny. But although they still remained mystifying and nebulous, he could discern an elegant underlying structure to their dazzling, dizzying arrays now. He could also feel the purpose of various elements of the weave more clearly. The spell weave of the Dawn Shard was not the most complex he had ever seen, but it was more complex than most. Even after isolating the rudimentary enchantments that all memories possessed and the special properties shared by shard memories, the remaining expanse of ethereal strings was Byzantine and daunting. Luckily, his goal was not to recreate the weave from scratch. He also did not intend to alter its function, only its capacity and resilience, as well as transplanting a new, much more potent nexus than the existing one. With a sigh, Sunny summoned the covetous coffer and produced a large, shining crystal from within it. When put together, the band of bright metal and the supreme soul shard he had harvested from the guts of the black turtle looked comical. The soul shard was much larger than the crown of dawn, yet it was supposed to become encompassed by it. But that was not an obstacle. Weaves did not exist in the physical sense anyway. Just like souls, they inhabited an entirely different plane of existence. Sunny pulled on the invisible thread of shadow essence. At the same time, a needle that shone with a faint golden glow appeared in one of his hands. He took a deep breath. Steady. The process had to be steady. But it couldn't be slow. Sunny would have to remove the original nexus first before transplanting a new one. The moment it was removed, the weave was going to start falling apart. So, he had to tie as many of the most important threads back, fast, and then bring the rest back even faster. He had spent years learning sorcery and 2 weeks restlessly preparing for this moment. But the outcome was going to be decided in less than 10 minutes. If Sunny succeeded, the cohort would acquire a powerful tool to help them survive the nightmare. If he failed, the Dawn Shard would be destroyed, and he would have to explain himself to one hell of an angry changing star. She probably won't kill me, right? But just in case, I'd better not fail. Of course you will. When have you ever not failed? The Sin of Solace was observing the process with a disdainful expression. Sunny was concentrating on the task so much that he had lowered his guard as a result. The hurtful remark actually cut for once. Well, to be honest, they always cut a little. But this time, he felt bitter anger swell in his chest. Calm down. Throwing a dark look at the grinning apparition, Sunny wrapped all 5 shadows around himself and summoned the Crown of Twilight. As the first ray of sunshine burst from the horizon, he took a deep breath and thrust one of his shadow hands into the ethereal tapestry of the spell weave. His clawed fingers wrapped themselves around the shining nexus and then crushed it, destroying the anchor of the countless threads. I wonder how anyone could have been a weaver before me. Sunny was more or less certain that the very ability to not only see but also touch the ethereal strings was granted to him by Bone Weave. His eyes had been altered by consuming a drop of Weaver's blood, while his fingers had been altered by swallowing the alabaster phalanx of the Demon of Fate. On the surface, the alteration simply made them more sensitive, but he felt that it went much deeper than that. Who knew? Maybe he would be able to caress the strings of fate itself one day. Before the radiant weave could fully fall apart, his other hand placed the supreme soul shard in its center. The one that had crushed the original nexus was already retreating, catching the most important thread as it did. 3 more hands flashed forward, doing the same. The last hand, his left human hand, was the most important, since it held Weaver's needle. All the rest were meant to stall the deterioration of the weave, but it was meant to actually mend the damage. Threading the first ethereal string into the radiant needle, Sunny connected it to the nexus. Then another and another. Faster. 5 of his hands danced, manipulating the dying weave into following their will. holding it from crumbling and pulling it back from the verge of collapse. At the precise moment when the new nexus became connected to enough strings to hold it in place, the sixth joined them. What madness made me think that having only 5 fingers is enough? Damnation! I should have learned to have more. Time seemed to have slowed down. Sonny felt the same rush of adrenaline he did during furious battles. His perception subtly changed, turning the world stark and clear. Golden sparks glimmered in the depths of his dark eyes. For a few moments, everything was in a fragile balance. One wrong move, one slightest mistake, and the weave would have reached the point of no return. But Sonny did not make any mistakes. He performed every movement flawlessly, focused to such a degree that all his senses except sight and the tactile feeling of intangible threads sliding through his fingers disappeared. Finally, after something that felt both like a second and an eternity, that moment of fragility passed. The main structure of the weave had been connected to the new nexus, ensuring its stability. Good. As Sonny's hands continued to tie the few last threads to the shining ember, his mind already wandered to the next task. The first step of the alteration had been completed, but the result was still uncertain. The next stage was going to decide whether he would succeed or not, and while it gave him more leeway, it was no less difficult. Chapter 1348, Sorcerer Supreme. Now that a Supreme Soul Shard replaced the original nexus of the spell weave, the powerful energy contained within it flowed into the radiant tapestry. The ethereal threads shone much brighter, reinforced by their own enchantment. Most of them held, but some of the more delicate patterns started to glow too intensely, as if a moment away from catching on fire and dissipating into blinding light. He had to reinforce these sections of the weave, and do it in a way that did not contradict the intricate patterns. Threading a string of shadow essence into Weaver's needle, he held himself back from hurrying too much, and started to weave new patterns, these ones black and lightless on top and through the radiant ones. The needle worked in the most pressing areas of the weave, while his other hands tackled less critical points. No matter how nimble his fingers were, he still couldn't weave as fast without a proper tool. The reverse effect of his unique ability to touch the ethereal strings was that they were sharper than any sword could ever be, and were thus capable of cutting his flesh without any effort. Losing a finger was as easy as applying the slightly wrong amount of pressure, or missing the mark by a hair's breadth. That said, while his own fingers were indispensable, those of the shadow hands could be easily sacrificed. They weren't just as responsive as the real ones, but the fact that one or two could be lost with no consequence made up for the fact. Ouch! No matter how careful Sonny was, the dire need to move fast was bound to cause him some pain. A thin cut appeared on his right thumb, swelling with blood. Luckily, no drop of it fell into the weave to disturb its delicate equilibrium. His blood was tenacious, after all, and knew how to stay inside his body. Most of the time. The shadow hands were faring worse. By the time Sonny put out the most dangerous fires, they were utterly shredded. He was barely keeping the wounded shadows from dissipating back into intangible forms, and had even been forced to dismiss one of the arms and create an entirely new one on the fly. Nevertheless, it felt like he was past the most dangerous part. A shaky breath escaped from Sonny's lips, and a drop of sweat fell from his forehead onto the wooden deck. Without allowing himself to relax, he froze for a split second, gazing at the entirety of the weave. The nexus is holding. There and there the shadow strings are lessening the burden on the original ones just as planned. That area is a bit frayed. I need to reinforce it more. No, not more, better. Those areas, though, looked fine at the start, but are starting to worry me now. Calming his wildly beating heart, he resumed his work. Now Sonny moved at a less breakneck pace, but was more methodical in his approach. Good, good, it's all coming together. It was a wonderful feeling. The collapsing weave had struggled against his attempts to save it at first, to the point that he felt like 3 critical problems appeared for each one he fixed. The more he repaired and reinforced it, though, the more it felt like the weave was assisting him. The ethereal tapestry was starting to look elegant once again. The radiant threads and the lightless ones intertwined in a beautiful harmony. Both were being strengthened by the enchantment of the Dawn Shard and strengthening each other at the same time. A feeling of wondrous harmony permeated the intricate spell weave. Its nexus was replaced, and its pattern was invaded by countless new threads, all of them dark and ghostly. But nevertheless, it was resembling a different but natural version of itself, more and more. Continuing his meticulous work, Sonny threw a brief glance at the sin of solace. "Hey, you!" The sword wraith raised an eyebrow. "Hey yourself, fool!" Sonny was already looking back at the weave, concentrating on finishing the alteration, but the corner of his mouth rose in a small, vindictive smile. "Go drown yourself in the river, you insufferable wretch. Weren't you endlessly going on about how I would inevitably fail? Well, did I? Who's the fool now, huh?" At that moment, he grinned and abruptly lowered all 6 of his hands, then froze, staring intently at the bond of bright metal laying on the deck in front of him. His work was done. The alteration had been finished. Sonny took a deep breath, and as he did, the spell whispered into his ear, "Your memory has been destroyed." His eyes widened. His hands twitched. Ho! Before the shock could even register in his mind, the spell spoke once more. "You have received a supreme memory, Crown of Dawn." Sonny remained frozen for a few moments, then slumped against the side of the ketch. An infuriating growl escaped from his lips. "What? What the hell was that? Are you trying to give me a heart attack, you damned spell? Think before you speak, damn it." The spell did not answer, perhaps for the better. After calming down a little, Sonny dismissed the shadow arms and picked up the Crown of Dawn from the deck. His hands were trembling slightly. The eastern horizon was already painted lilac by the rising suns. Looking at the memory he had altered with burning eyes, he lingered for a while, and then said tiredly, "So your name actually changed to the Crown of Dawn. Ah, how fitting." Before that had simply been what they called the Dawn Shard, the shard memory of the First Lord of the Bright Castle, but it seemed that the spell decided that the alteration he had performed was significant enough to warrant a new name for the newly elevated memory. Was he mistaken, or had the single gemstone adorning the austere band of metal become brighter? Enjoying the view of the bright gem, Sonny inhaled deeply and summoned the runes. The runes read, "Memory, Crown of Dawn, Memory Rank, Supreme." Chapter 1349, Crowning Achievement. Sonny remained motionless for a while, looking at the string of shimmering runes. A sense of profound relief and exhilaration washed over him. He suddenly felt refreshed and invigorated, as if his fatigue had receded a little, his mind clearing. No, not suddenly. Touching the smooth silk of the Shroud of Dusk, Sonny belatedly realized that it was already being augmented by the passive enchantment of the empowered Crown of Dawn. It's working. He closed his eyes for a moment, then took a look at the rest of the runes describing the band of bright metal. They were the same as before, only the rank of the memory had changed. Sonny had expected that. In fact, anything else would have been a cause for concern. The goal of the alteration was to strengthen the existing enchantment, after all, not change it. The Crown of Dawn would still be able to enhance all memories in a large area around it, with no limit to their number. It was just that the augmentation it provided had become much more potent. Most miraculous of all, that enchantment somehow remained a passive one. His eyes gleamed darkly. I think, armed with that power, the cohort would be able to challenge enemies far beyond their own level of prowess, which meant that they would have a much higher chance of conquering the nightmare and returning to the waking world alive. Just like they had conquered the Forgotten Shore and returned from its unforgiving expanse alive. He smiled, then dismissed the Crown of Dawn and rose. Heading to the stern of the ship, Sonny tried to contain his emotions. His face remained neutral, with only a faint smile playing on his lips. Soon he saw Nephis. She threw a glance at him with the same calm expression she usually wore, then asked evenly, "What was the shouting about?" Sonny stumbled. "Right. I did curse the spell out, didn't I? In hindsight, that was probably not wise." He wouldn't put it past the damn thing to know how to hold a grudge. The descriptions it made of him were already vaguely snide, so Sonny shuddered at the thought of what the next one was going to say. Whatever. That will happen later. Right now, though. Walking over to Nephis, he shrugged. "Oh, it's nothing really. I just got a bit emotional and let the spell have it." "Why? Have you never yelled at the spell? She stared at him dubiously. Can't say that I have. Sunny coughed. Well, anyway, give me your hand. Without waiting for permission, he grabbed it, lingered for a moment, and sent the crown of dawn from his soul into hers. Nephis turned her head slightly and stared into the distance, or rather, it seemed like she did. In truth, she must have been reading the runes. Oh, its name has changed. Then, she suddenly froze. Sunny studied her face with rapt attention, registering every minute change. Sadly, Changing Star was not the kind of person to openly show emotions nevertheless. He noticed her pupils widening slightly, white sparks igniting in their depths. Huh? He laughed. You finally noticed its rank, didn't you? Well, well, well. No need to praise me too much. I just took the soul shard we scavenged from inside the black turtle and transplanted it into the dawn shard, strengthening the weave of its enchantment to withstand the burden of channeling supreme power in the process. That's all. Sunny looked down modestly. I am totally not a peerless genius among peerless geniuses. You absolutely don't need to worship the ground I walk on. There's no ground in the tomb of Ariel, anyway. Nephis suddenly gripped his hand tightly and pierced him with a burning gaze. Sunny, you can elevate memories to higher ranks now? He smiled, enjoying the intensity of her reaction. However, his smile dimmed a little bit the next moment. Well, yes, but also no. Sunny sighed. The case of the Crown of Dawn is unique because it possesses an enchantment that enhances itself. That is why I was able to outfit it with a supreme soul shard and elevate its power by 2 whole ranks. For other memories, I doubt that they'll endure such a significant alteration. Elevating them by 1 rank, though, that should be possible for some, I think, if time-consuming. Nephis stared at him in silence. He hesitated for a few moments, then said in a somewhat stifled tone, But She raised an eyebrow slightly. Yes. Sunny coughed. Can you let go of my hand? You're sort of crushing it. Nephis looked down, blinked a couple of times, then hurriedly released her grip. Oh, Sunny shook his hand in the air. It didn't really hurt, but he had suddenly become painfully aware of how close they were standing. His face felt hot. Letting out an awkward chuckle, he shook his head and pointed to her head. Now summon that thing. I came here right away, so I don't even know how powerful exactly it has become. Nephis nodded, and a whirlwind of radiant sparks appeared around her. Soon a band of bright metal manifested itself from thin air, its single gem glistening in the light of the rising suns. Let's do this. For the next half an hour, Sunny and Nephis were engrossed in testing the effects of the Crown of Dawn on their memories. The results went beyond his wildest imagination. Sunny had thought that his makeshift alteration would cause a loss of potential, resulting in a memory that was a supreme one in name, but not in power. And there was some loss, inevitably, but so little that it could almost be disregarded. Before, the Dawn Shard had been capable of elevating the power of awakened memories to resemble that of ascended ones. It had also been capable of providing a significant boost to ascended memories, and a slight one to transcendent ones. The meaning of power in this context was an elusive one. The augmentation did not only empower the enchantments of the enhanced memories, but also the quality of the memories themselves. Swords would become sharper, armor would become more durable. There was also something else at play, the intangible mystical quality that made magical materials different from the mundane ones was enhanced as well, which was why the dreamers of the Dark City had been able to harm and slay enemies of higher ranks with their awakened weapons. The Crown of Dawn functioned in a similar fashion to its predecessor. However, its augmentation was much more powerful. An average awakened weapon was elevated to the level of a peak ascended one, while the most powerful awakened weapons could almost reach the realm of transcendence. Ascended memories were elevated to the level of transcendent ones. While transcendent memories, Sunny grew still, peering into the depths of the Sin of Solace. Under his gaze, the weave of the Jade Jian shone with blinding brilliance. It's not that different from the Crown of Twilight. It is like a supreme weapon. He threw a glance at the silent apparition that stood a few steps away, wearing a somber expression, and suddenly felt a pang of apprehension. Dismissing the Sin of Solace, Sunny hesitated for a few moments, then finally took the crown of twilight off his head and studied it. It was benefiting from being in the presence of the crown of dawn as well. The boost was not as striking as it was for the memories of lesser ranks, but still tangible. Nephis, meanwhile, was holding her longsword with a hard-to-read expression. Suddenly, though, her beautiful face was illuminated by a radiant smile. "Sunny, this is amazing. With this, we can." She stumbled over her words, not knowing what to say. Enjoying the rare sight of her smiling brightly, he nodded and looked in the direction where the current was pulling them. His own smile grew a little cold. "Yes." Sunny gritted his teeth. "We can slaughter them all." The winds filled the sails of the chain-breaker, pushing it forward. The past awaited. Chapter 1350, Familiar Pattern. By the time Sunny had finished the alteration of the Dawn Shard, they were not that far away from Fallen Grace. Neither he nor Nephis knew the exact distance they had to traverse to find the last city of the Sibyls, but the navigation tools Ananke had left them pointed to its approach. Fallen Grace was situated in the western reaches of the Great River, where the sky was almost always painted crimson by the setting sun. As the chain breaker sailed deeper into the past, it was also leaving behind the pure light of day. Gradually, the color of the sky above their heads changed, from vibrant azure to breathtaking magenta, and finally to the blood-red blaze of perpetual sunset. It was like sailing into a sea of blood. Sunny stared at the burning sky, awed by its fiery beauty and its ominous dread. That's not concerning at all. Why would the Sibyls build one of their cities in such a darkly beautiful but sinister place? Surely, living in the warm sunlight of the central region of the Great River would have been much more pleasant. Shaking his head, he returned to the shade of the sacred tree and sat down, resting his back against its white bark. He had just finished weaving another memory for Nightmare, and was not in the mood to start on the next one just yet. His study of the spell weave of Ananke's mantle had also been producing fewer and fewer results. It would never stop being useful to him as a learning tool, but Sunny felt like he was nearing a dead end. He would need to gain more skill as a weaver before looking to the nebulous mantle for more lessons. So what else was there to do? Feeling restless, he summoned the estuary key out of habit. Staring into the weave of the mysterious memory had become like a ritual by now. Even though Sunny could not understand anything about it, the process itself was calming. However, he had not taken a glance at the key since before attempting the alteration of the Crown of Dawn. Who knew? Maybe passing such an important milestone on his path to becoming a proper sorcerer would change something. "Are you playing with our favorite toy again? Why don't you toss it overboard and be done with it?" The sword wraith stared at him disdainfully from the shadows of the tree. Not paying the apparition any attention, Sunny held up the jagged black stone and peered into its weathered surface. The inconceivable weave of ghostly strings was as unattainable as ever. He studied its dark tapestry, following the twists and turns of the black threads like he had done 100 times before. What a disappointment. I still can't even start to unravel its mysteries. Among all the odd things Sunny had seen and faced in the nightmare, the estuary key was perhaps the most bizarre. He still had no idea how this supreme memory of the sixth tier had ended up in his soul sea, or what it was supposed to do. However, after spending countless hours staring at the staggering weave of ghostly strings, he had gained a vague, tentative feeling about it. Sunny was mostly confident that the single, passive enchantment of the estuary key had two distinct effects. He did not know what these effects were, but felt that one was directed outward, while the other was directed inward, affecting the black stone itself in some manner. The latter was also much more vast and potent than the former. It was unusual that a memory of the sixth tier only possessed a single enchantment. Since it did, that enchantment had to be a powerful one, and most of that power went into ensuring the function of the inward effect. Maybe that's why I wasn't able to discern what exactly the enchantment does. It's only affecting the estuary key itself. Perhaps it was an enchantment that teleported the strange memory into the souls of unsuspecting awakened without their consent. As Sunny was feeling amused with this theory, his gaze suddenly caught on a minuscule part of the inconceivable weave. The lightless tapestry was vast enough that he might have never seen it before, or if he had, Sunny had not paid it any attention. But now he froze, staring at the inconspicuous pattern. What? What the hell is that? The pattern looked familiar. Sunny had definitely seen it before, somewhere else, recently. Which was not that strange in and of itself. The estuary key was a memory, after all. And as such, it shared many small parts of its weave with all other memories. The patterns that created the rudimentary enchantments, like the ability to be summoned and dismissed, repair itself, and so on. However, Sunny knew these patterns by heart. He had woven them from scratch many times after all, and this one was not one of them. Where have I seen it? The complicated array of ghostly strings had a certain unique structure to it, which was different from the rest of the spell weave. He recognized its nature after a moment of contemplation. Patterns like these were rare, but present in every memory. It was how runes were expressed through essence strings. Both the runic sorcery and shaping were based on true names, one etching them through a written language, the other invoking them directly. However, weaving was different. It did not rely on words to create enchantments. That said, there was still a place for words in a spell weave, and therefore for the runes inscribing them. These runes, translated from the corresponding string patterns, expressed the name of the memory, its description, and the true name of its master, if the master possessed one. The problem was that Sunny had long identified the patterns that inscribed the name and description of the estuary key, as well as his own true name, and this particular pattern had nothing to do with them. Why were there additional runes hidden in the weave of the black stone, and why did the pattern of essence strings describing these runes look so familiar? Sunny leaned forward with a frown and concentrated, trying to decipher the meaning of the pattern. It was not at all difficult, in fact. It was even easier than usual, as if he had read this exact pattern of essence strings many times before. His pupils narrowed. Sunny suddenly straightened, a cold shiver running down his spine. Standing in the shadows, the apparition yawned and covered his mouth with a hand. What's the matter? Solace, the sin of Solace. Written in ghostly strings, the name of his cursed sword, and the sword wraith born from its curse, was meticulously woven into the enchantment of the estuary key.